My name's Evan, and I'm 29. For most of my life, I thought family meant unconditional love, the kind where you show up for each other, no questions asked. I held on to that belief through every petty insult, every overlooked achievement, every time my brother, Josh, made sure I knew I was the outsider. Growing up, it was small things. Him getting the new bike while I got the hand-me-down, him throwing a tantrum until he got the bigger bedroom, him being celebrated while I was the afterthought. I told myself it didn't matter, that one day we'd be adults and it would all even out. That family would finally feel like family. I held on to that hope way longer than I should have. When I landed my first real job out of college, a tough, competitive position in a new city, I excitedly texted my family. Josh's reply was a gif of someone slow clapping sarcastically. My mom said she was so proud, but then asked if I could help Josh with his rent since he was going through a hard time. It was always the same dance. Josh would stumble, and I'd be expected to catch him. Never mind that he was older. Never mind that he'd had every advantage I didn't. Somewhere along the line, it became a family joke that I was the responsible one, the backup plan. I laughed along sometimes, just to belong. But a part of me kept a tally, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. Thanksgiving had always been our big gathering. No matter where life took us, everyone was expected to show up at my parents' house, sit around the overstuffed table, and pretend everything was perfect. Last year was different, though. Last year, I had started to see things a little more clearly. I'd spent the year working brutal hours, saving up for a down payment on my first home. Meanwhile, Josh had bounced between jobs, borrowed thousands from my parents, and somehow still managed to post pictures from expensive concerts and beach trips. Every time I visited home, the tension felt thicker. My mom would pull me aside and gently hint that Josh was just struggling right now. My dad would grumble about how family supports family, casting long looks at me over his beer. I knew what they meant. They wanted me to hand over more money. Again, quietly, without making it awkward. I told myself I could get through Thanksgiving if I just kept my head down. Smile, nod, survive. That was the plan. I even convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, this year would be different. Maybe they'd finally see me as more than a wallet with a heartbeat. I showed up with a homemade dessert, trying to force myself into the holiday spirit. The house was packed. Cousins I hadn't seen in years, old family friends. It was one of those loud, chaotic Thanksgivings where the smell of turkey and too many perfumes swirl together, and kids are screaming somewhere in the background. I tried to blend in, carving out a quiet corner of the couch, sipping my drink, listening. It didn't take long for the usual patterns to emerge. Josh, of course, was holding court at the center of everything, telling exaggerated stories about his latest business ventures and making everyone laugh with jokes at my expense. I was used to that, the little jabs about how Evan probably has a spreadsheet for his social life, or how Evan's idea of fun is reading tax codes. I smiled tightly. Whatever. It wasn't new. Dinner was worse. Somehow, the seating arrangement had me squeezed at the very end of the table, half balanced on a folding chair while Josh was seated right next to Dad at the head. They toasted Josh's entrepreneurial spirit, while conveniently forgetting that his so-called ventures had been funded by constant bailouts. I kept smiling. I focused on my plate. I told myself not to cause a scene. Then came dessert. Someone refilled everyone's glasses, and my dad raised his to say something heartfelt about gratitude. I leaned back, ready to disappear into the wallpaper. That's when Josh stood up, glass raised high, swaying a little from all the drinks. "Here's to family," he said loudly, grinning. Except Evan, of course. The whole table burst out laughing. Even my mother, who at least used to fake discomfort at these things, chuckled behind her napkin. I sat there, staring at my half-eaten slice of pie, feeling something inside me go very, very still. For a split second, I thought about laughing along. That old instinct. Make it easy for everyone. Be a good sport. Don't make it awkward. Instead, I set my fork down gently, wiped my mouth with my napkin, and smiled. "Good thing I planned ahead," I said, my voice even and pleasant. I reached down beside my chair and pulled out the envelope I tucked into my jacket pocket before leaving home. I didn't slam it on the table or throw a tantrum. I simply set it down in front of Josh, right between his glass and his half-eaten slice of pecan pie. The laughter faltered. Josh blinked down at the envelope, confused, the bravado slipping from his face. He looked up at me, smirking weakly like he thought it was a joke. "What's this?" he snickered. "It's a notice," I said. He snorted and tore the envelope open, still trying to play to the room. Still trying to keep the joke alive. I watched his face change. First confusion, then a flicker of worry, then pure, stark white panic. The room, once filled with easy laughter and clinking glasses, went dead silent. Every pair of eyes locked onto Josh as he stared at the paper in his hands, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. My dad leaned forward, frowning. My mom set down her glass a little too hard. Somewhere in the background, someone dropped a spoon. Josh finally looked up at me, his face drained of color. You can't be serious," he stammered. I just smiled, slow and calm, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying for years. I didn't say another word. Not yet. I let the silence stretch, thick and uncomfortable, the whole room practically vibrating with tension. I wanted them to feel it, really feel it, because for once, I wasn't going to smooth things over. I wasn't going to rescue Josh. I wasn't going to make it easy for anyone. Josh's hand trembled slightly as he set the paper down, but he couldn't seem to tear his eyes away from it. His lips were moving, but no sound was coming out, like he was trying to summon the swagger he always leaned on, the easy jokes, the cocky grin, but it had deserted him. Good. I wanted him to sit in that helplessness for a minute. I wanted every fake laugh, every eye roll, every offhand comment about how I was just the responsible one to echo back at him now, in front of the whole family. My mom was the first to crack. She reached across the table, snatching up the paper with quick, jerky movements. Her eyes scanned it rapidly, and I watched the blood drain from her face just like it had from Josh's. "Evan," she said in a strangled voice. What is this?" I took my time. I picked up my glass, took a small sip, and set it down carefully. Then I met her eyes. "It's a notice of lien removal," I said calmly. "Filed this morning." The room stayed frozen, like the house itself was holding its breath. My dad leaned forward now, his forehead wrinkled. "Lien? On what?" I turned to him, smiling pleasantly. "On Josh's truck, on his apartment, and on the business account you co-signed for him last year. All the things I personally guaranteed so he could keep pretending he was a big shot." I paused to let that sink in. Several of my cousins were staring openly now, forks halfway to their mouths, forgotten. "You co-signed for me?" Josh croaked, voice thin and high-pitched. I tilted my head slightly. "You didn't know? Mom and Dad needed someone with good credit. Yours wasn't exactly an option." A soft, shocked noise rippled around the table. Josh was shaking his head frantically now. But, you said you were helping." "You said." "I was helping," I cut in, my voice still pleasant, almost pitying. "Until you decided to humiliate me. Again. Publicly. After everything." I let that hang in the air for a beat longer. "See," I continued, still smiling like we were discussing the weather, "the thing about liens is, they come with strings. When I withdrew my guarantee this morning, those strings snapped." "Which means your truck." I gestured casually. "The one you're still paying off? That lender's going to want their collateral back. Probably by Monday." "And your apartment lease?" "Well, without me co-signing, that back rent you've been ignoring, that's going to be a problem. A pretty immediate one." Josh's mouth was opening and closing like he couldn't decide whether to scream or cry. "Maybe both." "And the business account?" I added thoughtfully. "The one you use to rent office space and buy all that fancy equipment? Without my guarantee, it's frozen pending review. Creditors will come knocking soon. Probably before dessert." The silence that followed was dense and suffocating. Finally, my dad barked out, "You can't do this to your own brother." I leaned back, folding my arms. I didn't do anything to him. I just stopped doing things for him. There it was. The truth, finally spoken aloud. Josh pushed back from the table so hard that his chair screeched against the hardwood floor. He stumbled to his feet, his face twisted in rage and panic. "You're ruining my life," he shouted, voice cracking. I raised an eyebrow. "Funny. You never seemed to think I was part of your life unless you needed a bailout." That hit harder than I expected. For a moment, Josh looked like a little boy again, the kind who used to shove me down and laugh when I cried. Only now there was no one laughing, no one backing him up. Even my mom stayed silent, her mouth a tight, pale line. Josh's gaze darted around the room, desperate for support, but found none. The cousins who used to laugh at his jokes were staring at their plates. The aunts and uncles were suddenly very interested in refilling their drinks. Even Dad looked uncomfortable, though whether it was guilt or just anger that his golden boy had stumbled, I couldn't tell. Josh turned back to me, his face crumpling into something almost pitiful. You can't just leave me hanging," he choked out. "You have to help me fix this." I picked up my glass again, swirling the dark liquid idly. "I don't have to do anything, Josh," I said softly. Not anymore. And with that, I stood up. I tucked my chair back under the table neatly, like nothing at all was wrong. I glanced around the room, at all the shocked faces, the awkward silence, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the outsider. I felt free. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the dining room, my footsteps echoing in the stunned quiet. Behind me, I heard Josh slump back into his chair with a broken sound, like the air had been knocked out of him. I heard my mother start to whisper shout at my father. I heard forks clinking awkwardly against plates as people pretended they weren't part of a complete implosion. I stepped out onto the front porch, the cold November air biting at my cheeks, and closed the door behind me with a soft click. I stood there on the porch for a moment, breathing in the crisp air, letting it settle inside me like armor. The muffled sounds of chaos seeped through the closed door behind me, frantic voices, the scrape of chairs, hurried footsteps. Good. Let them scramble. Let them feel even a fraction of the helplessness they had forced me to swallow all these years. I wasn't the responsible one anymore. I wasn't the backup plan. I was done patching holes in a sinking ship while they laughed and kept drilling more. I walked down the front steps slowly, savoring each one. My car was parked at the curb, packed and ready. I had already known how tonight would go, no matter how much I tried to lie to myself. I had planned for this moment like I planned for everything, carefully, quietly, and completely. When I slid behind the wheel, my phone buzzed violently against the console. I glanced at it, 26 missed calls. Mostly from my mom and dad. A few from Josh. Some from random cousins who probably had no idea what they were supposed to do, pick a side, stay out of it. Beg me to fix it quietly before the neighbors noticed. I turned the ringer off and set the phone face down. I wasn't interested in hearing excuses. I wasn't interested in hearing how it's not that deep, or family fights sometimes, or he didn't mean it. They always said that. Every time Josh crossed a line, every time he humiliated me, every time he made it clear I was only valued for what I could do, not who I was. And every time, I was expected to forgive, to forget, to smile through it because that's just Josh. Not anymore. I started the car, the low rumble of the engine grounding me. I pulled away from the curb, not fast, not dramatically, just steady. Sure, I didn't need a big exit. The real explosion was still happening inside that house. I drove through town, past the familiar streets lined with old oaks and sagging porches wrapped in Christmas lights already. Places where I used to walk as a kid, clutching report cards they barely glanced at, dreaming about the day they'd finally notice me. I smiled to myself, but it wasn't a bitter smile. It was something quieter, stronger. They had noticed me now. About 20 minutes out of town, I pulled into a little gas station and parked under the buzzing fluorescent lights. I needed to check something before I went any further. I grabbed my laptop from the passenger seat, opened it on my lap, and tethered it to my phone. The connection was slow, but it didn't matter. I wasn't in a rush. I had all the time in the world now. I logged into the financial portal that handled the liens, the guarantees, the legal notices. I scrolled through the records slowly, savoring every word. Notice delivered. Account frozen. Repossession proceedings initiated. Everything was falling exactly into place. Josh would lose the truck first, probably before Monday, like I said. Then the apartment. Eviction notices were brutal this time of year. The business account would be seized before he could even blink. The equipment he liked to show off, the fancy monitors, the drone cameras, the espresso machine he bragged about, all of it would be gone within weeks. No more pretending to be an entrepreneur. No more living large on my sacrifices. I closed the laptop with a satisfying click and leaned back against the seat, staring up at the buzzing lights. I wasn't naive. I knew they'd come after me next, with guilt, with pleas, maybe even with threats. My parents would probably call it a misunderstanding. They'd demand I fix it, sweep it under the rug again, because that was the way things were supposed to work. Josh screwed up. I saved him. The sun rose, the sun set. Not anymore. Because I had planned for that too. Earlier that week, I had contacted a lawyer, one of the best in the state. I paid for an airtight letter to be drafted and mailed to every member of my immediate family. It outlined, in simple, brutal language, that I was severing all financial ties effective immediately, that any attempt to contact me regarding money would result in legal action, that all previous loans, gifts, and informal agreements were null and void. They couldn't guilt-trip me. They couldn't shame me. They couldn't trap me. I was free. As I sat there under the humming lights, I really realized, that I wasn't running away from them. I was running towards something. Toward peace. toward a life where my worth wasn't measured in how much I could give and how little I could ask for, toward people who valued me not for what I could do for them, but for who I was. The gas station attendant gave me a suspicious look as I sat there smiling like a lunatic, but I didn't care. I grabbed a soda from the mini-mart, tipped him way too much just because I could, and hit the road again. Miles slipped away under my tires, and with them, years of resentment, of loneliness, of biting my tongue until it bled. It felt good. It felt right. The phone buzzed again once, twice, then a third time, but I didn't bother looking. I knew exactly what those texts would say. Please just come back inside. We can talk about this. You're being dramatic, Evan. Fix this. You're ruining Thanksgiving. But they were wrong. I didn't ruin Thanksgiving. They did. They just finally had to sit with the wreckage they'd built themselves, without me there to clean it up. I kept driving until the town disappeared behind me, swallowed up by fields and forests in the dark November sky. I didn't have a final destination yet, just a hotel booked a few hours away, a few job interviews lined up in new cities. A whole new life unfolding, slow and certain and mine. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running on fumes. I was running on freedom, and I wasn't slowing down. The next morning, I woke up in a quiet hotel room 2 towns over. A soft gray light filtered through the heavy curtains, and for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel the crushing weight of obligation the moment I opened my eyes. No urgent calls, no guilt-laden voicemails waiting to pounce. Just silence. Peace. I stretched out lazily, letting myself enjoy the sensation. It was strange, honestly, how heavy freedom could feel at first, like I had been carrying so much for so long that my body didn't know how to set it down completely. But it was getting lighter by the minute. I could feel it. When I finally checked my phone, it was predictably a mess. 78 missed calls. A ridiculous number of texts. The family group chat, usually filled with vacation photos and passive-aggressive comments about politics, was practically melting down. I didn't open any of it yet. I wasn't ready to let their voices back into my head. Not today. Instead, I ordered room service, a ridiculous, overpriced breakfast I never would have let myself splurge on before. Pancakes, bacon, eggs, a giant coffee. When the knock finally came, I practically threw the door open with a grin and tipped the poor guy like a drunk lottery winner. He looked startled but pleased. I didn't care. Let the world be confused by my happiness. I had earned it. I spent the morning planning. There was still work to do if I wanted this break to be permanent. Loose ends to tie up, accounts to close, new ones to open. I needed to transfer everything out of the old family shared financial services and into ones they couldn't even sniff at. New phone plan, new address, new emergency contacts. No more mom listed as a backup. No more dad having access to anything just in case. I needed a clean slate, and I was getting it. Around noon, after polishing off the last of my coffee, I finally gave myself permission to read through some of the messages. I wasn't doing it out of guilt. I wanted to see how bad it had gotten. And frankly, I was curious how creative they were getting. I wasn't disappointed. My mom had sent a long string of messages, each one escalating a little more. First came the guilt. Please, Evan, this isn't you. You're better than this. Come home, and we can talk about it. Then the gaslighting. You're remembering things wrong. Josh always looked up to you. You're just being sensitive. Then the blame. You're tearing this family apart. Over what? Money? Pride? We raised you better than this. And finally, the desperation. If you don't come back and fix this, Josh will lose everything. Do you want that on your conscience? Josh himself had sent shorter, angrier texts. More raw. Less manipulative. You're a selfish piece of garbage. After everything we did for you? Hope you enjoy Thanksgiving alone, loser. You think you're better than us? You're nothing without us. I actually laughed at that one. A short, disbelieving laugh that startled even me. If anything, it proved just how right I had been to leave. If he still thought I was nothing, then why were they all falling apart without me? I didn't respond. Not a word. Instead, I drafted a final message. Short. Final. Unmistakable. This number will be disconnected by the end of the day. I have removed myself from all financial ties and responsibilities to the family. Do not contact me again. Any attempts to harass, threaten, or guilt-trip me will be forwarded to my attorney. Goodbye. I sent it to the family group chat. Then, without waiting to see the fallout, I turned off the phone, pulled out the SIM card, and snapped it cleanly in half. It felt good. Like finishing a long, brutal chapter in a book you never really wanted to be part of. I spent the next few weeks building my new life piece by piece. It wasn't glamorous. I slept in cheap hotels, sent out job applications, made 100 little calls, and filled out endless forms. I cut every old tie with a surgeon's precision, canceled my parents' access to my medical records, deleted them from my emergency contacts, froze my credit for a month just to be safe in case Josh got any bright ideas. And slowly, the noise died down. The frantic calls and emails slowed, then stopped. No one showed up banging on my door. They didn't know where to find me. I was a ghost in their lives now. A ghost that took all the scaffolding with him when he disappeared. One cold, bright morning in December, I sat at a little cafe in a new city hundreds of miles away, signing the lease on a small but beautiful apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No co-signers. No secret debts lurking beneath the surface. Just me, standing on my own 2 feet. The landlord slid the keys across the table with a grin. "Welcome home," he said. I took the keys, feeling the cool metal against my palm, and for the first time in a long, long time, I truly believed it. Months later, I heard through a distant cousin, one of the few who had never treated me like a second-class citizen, what had happened after I left. Josh's truck had indeed been repossessed. He tried to make a scene at the dealership, screaming about loyalty and betrayal, but it hadn't changed anything. The apartment complex had evicted him within a month. He tried crashing at my parents' house, but tensions exploded almost immediately. Turns out, when Josh wasn't cushioned by endless second chances and silent sacrifices, he wasn't so charming anymore. The business folded, unsurprisingly. Creditors swooped in like vultures, seizing everything. I heard rumors of screaming matches, of Josh blaming my parents blaming each other, ugly fights that shattered the perfect family image they had clung to so tightly. Last I heard, Josh was living in a tiny apartment in a sketchy part of town, working a dead-end job he hated. My parents had started quietly selling off assets to cover some of the debts, the boat they loved to brag about, Dad's classic car, the vacation fund Mom had been hoarding for a trip to Italy. Gone. Their golden boy had fallen. And without me there to pick up the pieces, they all went down with him. I didn't celebrate it. Not really. It was just justice. The natural consequence of a system built on using someone until there was nothing left. As for me, I found a new job, a good one, in a field I loved. I made friends who valued me for my mind, my heart, not my bank account. I traveled when I wanted to, learned to cook ridiculously complicated recipes just because it made me happy, started taking long walks at sunset with no one demanding I be anywhere or do anything. And every Thanksgiving, when the world buzzes with talk of family dinners and obligations, I sit by my little fireplace with a full heart, smiling softly to myself. Not because I lost my family, but because I finally found me. And this time, no one would take that away. Not ever again. My name's Ethan. I'm 34, single, no kids, and up until recently, I thought I was doing the right thing by being there for my family, even when they rarely, if ever, were there for me. I have a decent job in IT, nothing flashy, but it pays the bills and gives me enough stability to own a modest 3-bedroom home on the edge of a quiet suburb. It's not a mansion, but it has a backyard with a fig tree, a little guest room, and, most importantly to me, peace. At least, it used to. My parents moved in 5 years ago after my dad got laid off and my mom's arthritis made it hard for her to work long shifts. It wasn't meant to be permanent. Just a few months, they said, until we get back on our feet. I didn't think twice. They raised me, after all. The least I could do was give them a place to stay. But a few months turned into years. And over time, that gratitude they once had slowly twisted into entitlement. They never paid rent, never contributed to utilities. I covered the groceries, the internet, their prescriptions, even their streaming subscriptions. If I ever brought it up, even gently, my mom would sigh like I'd just asked her to chop wood with her bare hands. "You know we're struggling," she'd say. "Family helps family." My dad would just nod silently or change the subject. I started noticing little things. My mom would accidentally move my laundry out of the dryer and leave it crumpled on a chair so she could dry a single pair of socks. Dad took over the living room most days, watching old war movies at full volume while I tried to take Zoom calls from my home office. I once asked if they could keep the noise down while I worked, and my mom just muttered, "Maybe you should get a real office if you're so sensitive." That one stung. Then there was my sister, Rachel. She's 31, married, lives 20 minutes away in a 2-story house her husband's parents helped them buy. She visits maybe once a month. Not to help, no? Usually to lecture. Ethan, you spoil them, she'd say, flipping her sleek blonde hair back like she was the voice of reason. You shouldn't enable them like this. I always wanted to scream, then take them in yourself, but I never did. I bit my tongue. I always did. I think it was the illness that changed everything. Not a dramatic hospital scene or anything. Just a quiet, creeping weakness. I started feeling dizzy, lightheaded. Food had no taste. My joints ached like they belonged to a much older man. I'd get winded walking up the stairs. After some blood work, my doctor said it looked like an autoimmune flare-up. He wasn't sure which one yet. Maybe lupus, maybe something else, but it meant I needed to rest. Eat better. Avoid stress. Which, of course, was laughable. I came home that night, drained and foggy, and my mom was yelling at the microwave. She'd put metal in it again. The kitchen smelled like scorched plastic. My dad was asleep on the couch with half a sandwich on his chest, and Platoon was blaring on the TV. I remember just standing there, swaying slightly, trying to keep my composure. I asked, calmly, almost apologetically, if one of them could help with groceries that week. Just this once. My mom glanced up from the scorched mess, rolled her eyes, and said, "We're not your maids, Ethan." She didn't even say it with anger. Just boredom. Like I was asking her to fluff my pillows or wash my car. I blinked, waiting for my dad to say something. He didn't. And then Rachel, who just happened to be over for one of her check-ins, chimed in from the kitchen island without even looking up from her phone. Maybe budget better, Ethan. I wish I could say I exploded. That I screamed, through something, finally let out everything I'd bottled up for 5 years. But I didn't. I just stood there, my grocery list still in my hand, and nodded. Okay, I said. That was it. Just that. I didn't speak to any of them for the rest of the evening. I went to bed early, but I didn't sleep. My mind spun through every time I picked up their prescriptions, every birthday gift I'd bought and never received in return, every dish I washed after they left food crusted in the sink. I thought about my childhood, how my parents always had a "we're doing our best" excuse for every missed recital or forgotten birthday, how Rachel was the golden child and I was just expected to understand. Always. The next morning, I got up before anyone else. I made myself a quiet cup of coffee and stared out at the fig tree swaying in the breeze. I thought about what peace used to feel like. I realized I hadn't felt that in years. So I opened my laptop and started searching locksmiths. Found one with same-day service. Booked it. By noon, the guy was at my door, cheerful and fast. I told him I'd lost a key. He didn't ask questions. Changed the locks. Gave me 2 fresh keys and a receipt. I tipped him extra. Then I packed their things, quietly, respectfully. 2 suitcases each. Some of the stuff I boxed up. Labeled it with their names. Left everything neatly on the porch. They were out at the grocery store. My dad must have finally gotten off the couch, and I didn't expect them back for a few hours. When they did return, I was upstairs in my office with headphones on. I heard the front door rattle. Then knock. Then pounding. Then my mom's voice, shrill and incredulous. "Ethan? What the heck is this?" I didn't respond. I didn't have to. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. Rachel called next. Then texted. "Are you serious right now?" she wrote. "This is unhinged." I watched the chaos unfold from my upstairs window. My parents were standing in the driveway, flustered and confused. My mom was calling someone. I'm guessing Rachel. My dad just kept shaking his head like he couldn't believe it. My mom glanced up at the house, shielding her eyes from the sun, and shouted, "Ethan, this isn't funny." But I wasn't laughing. I just sat there quietly, a strange calm settling over me for the first time in what felt like forever. That's when my phone buzzed again. A voicemail from Rachel. I played it on speaker, hands folded in my lap. "Ethan, whatever you think you're doing, you need to stop." Mom's crying. Dad's exhausted. You're being dramatic. Just open the door and let's talk, okay? This is your family. You don't abandon people." I stared at the phone, then glanced at the locked front door below. For 5 years, they lived under my roof. Rent-free. No gratitude. No help. And now, the second I asked for a shred of support, I'm the one being dramatic? I picked up the phone, typed out a single message. I didn't send it yet. I was still deciding if I should. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't over. And that's when I saw Rachel's car pull up behind my parents in the driveway, tires crunching on the gravel, her door flinging open like she was about to stage some dramatic intervention. But what she did next made everything 10 times worse. She didn't even walk up to the house. She got out of her car in a fitted blazer and heels like she had just come from brunch, took one look at my parents standing helplessly beside their bags, and immediately turned the situation into a full-blown scene. Hands on hips, she scanned the porch, the suitcases, and then looked up at my window with that signature Rachel expression, disgusted and smug, like she was the adult cleaning up some teenager's mess. "You changed the locks?" she shouted loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "Are you serious, Ethan? Are you out of your mind?" My mom turned to her like she'd just been saved from a shipwreck. "He kicked us out," she gasped. "Like we're strangers. After everything we've done." Rachel stormed up to the front steps, grabbed one of the suitcases, and yanked it toward the door, as if sheer force would magically unlock it. "This is abuse," she called out. "You can't just evict your parents without warning. This is illegal." That's when I finally got up. I walked downstairs slowly, calmly, like I had all the time in the world. I opened the door halfway and leaned against the frame. "Hi, Rachel," I said. "Abuse? That's a little dramatic." Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't funny." "I agree," I said. "It stopped being funny 5 years ago." Mom stepped forward, looking suddenly fragile. Her tone softened. "Ethan, honey, can we please talk about this? This isn't like you. You've always been the good one." That part hit me harder than I expected. The good one. Not the loved one. Not the respected one. Just the one who stays quiet and keeps giving. I took a deep breath. "You've lived here for free for half a decade. I paid for everything, groceries, bills, even your doctor's visits. I never asked for rent. Never asked for anything, really." Mom nodded quickly, seizing the opening. "And we're grateful." "No, you're not," I cut in. "When I got sick last week, all I asked for was help with some food. And you looked me in the eye and said, 'We're not your maids.' Then Rachel told me to budget better. That's when I realized I don't live with family. I live with entitled squatters." Rachel's jaw dropped. Well, you really think you're some kind of victim, huh?" "No," I said, locking eyes with her. "I think I'm finally done being one." She scoffed and shook her head. "So what? You want to be alone? You want to end up bitter and miserable in this house all by yourself?" "I'd rather be alone than surrounded by people who only show up to take." My dad had been quiet this whole time. He sat down on the low stone step at the edge of the porch like the weight of it all had just hit him. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd say something human. But all he did was rub his temples and mumble, "You should have said something if you weren't happy." I nearly laughed. Said something? As if my exhaustion, my pleading glances, my half-hearted attempts at setting boundaries hadn't been screaming volumes. Rachel took a step forward, her tone shifting from outrage to icy calm. "If you don't let them back in, I'll call the police. I'll say you threw out 2 sick seniors without notice." I smiled, because I had been waiting for that. "Go ahead," I said. "But you might want to tell them about the 5 years of free rent, the groceries, the medical bills. And while you're at it, let them know I documented everything, bank statements, messages, even the house camera footage of you laughing when Mom told me to budget better. You think they're going to side with you?" Her face twitched for a split second. Just enough for me to know she hadn't expected that. "You're being cruel," she snapped, her voice rising again. "This is family, Ethan." "No," I said quietly. "This is the consequence." There was a long silence after that. The kind that doesn't just sit in the air but settles into your skin. My mom was crying now, actual tears. She reached for Rachel's arm and whispered, "Let's just go." Maybe he needs time." Rachel looked furious. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but not today." They gathered their things reluctantly. Rachel opened the trunk of her SUV, muttering the whole time. My parents shuffled over with their bags like they were being marched into exile. No one said goodbye. No one looked back. I stood there on the porch, watching them drive off. The silence was deafening. The war movies weren't playing. There were no pots clanging in the kitchen. Just the sound of birds and the faint hum of my neighbor's lawn mower. For the first time in a long time, my house felt like mine. But just as I was about to step back inside, my phone buzzed again. Another voicemail. This time from someone unexpected. It was my aunt, my mom's sister. And what she said in that message, it changed everything. I didn't answer right away. My aunt, Aunt Clara, wasn't someone I spoke to often. She lived 3 states away, had a soft voice and a sharp tongue, and only ever called for 2 reasons: holidays or hospital visits. So seeing her name flash across my screen immediately set off a quiet alarm in my head. Still standing on the porch, I played the voicemail with the tip of my thumb, half expecting a lecture, maybe even a guilt trip wrapped in passive-aggressive concern. But what I heard, it stopped me cold. "Ethan, sweetheart, I don't know exactly what's going on over there, but your mom just called me sobbing, saying you threw them out. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I need to tell you something. There's more to this, more than you know. Call me back. Please. It's important." I stood frozen for a moment, watching the street where their car had disappeared. My stomach tightened. More than I know? What did that even mean? I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the call button, before finally walking back inside, locking the door, and sinking into the couch. I didn't want to deal with more drama. Not after everything. But the way she said it. "There's more to this." It didn't sound like a lecture. It sounded like a warning. So I called her back. She picked up on the first ring. "Ethan," she asked, her voice lower than usual. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," I said slowly. "I mean, better than I was last week." "I heard about that," she replied. "Your mom told me you were sick." But she left out the part where she dismissed you like some lazy tenant. I blinked. So she admitted what she said? "Not in so many words," Clara said with a dry laugh. "But I've known your mother a long time. I know how she tells stories, who the hero always is." There was a pause. "Listen," she said, "before I say anything else, I need you to understand. This isn't about picking sides. I love your parents. But you deserve to know the truth about something, especially after what they just pulled." I sat forward. "Okay," she sighed, and when she spoke again, her tone shifted, lower, heavier. "Do you remember when your grandmother passed away? You were what, 22? "Yeah," I said. "I was in college." "And your mom and Rachel flew out to settle the estate?" "Right," I said slowly. "They were gone for like 2 weeks. I barely heard from them." "Well, they didn't just go out there to grieve. Your grandmother left behind a little more than anyone expected. Turns out she'd been saving for years, quietly, without telling anyone. She left behind a sizable inheritance. Not millions, but enough. It was meant to be split 3 ways: your mom, your Aunt Lydia, and you." My heart stopped. "Me?" "Yes, you. No one ever told me that." "Exactly." I sat there in stunned silence, trying to wrap my head around it. "Ethan, your mom convinced Lydia, and tried to convince me, that it would be better for you if they managed the money until you were more stable." That's the word she used. Stable. Like you were some flighty kid who couldn't be trusted not to blow it on guitars and video games. I exhaled sharply, a million memories suddenly clicking into place. The odd comments about me being irresponsible. The way Rachel always teased me about needing guidance. The time I tried to buy a used car and my credit mysteriously wasn't good enough, even though I'd paid off my student loans early. "You're saying they took my inheritance?" "They used your portion," Clara said, "to pay off Rachel's mortgage and your parents' debt. All of it. That's why your dad retired early. That's how they managed those vacations a few years ago, the ones they told you were paid for with points." I felt like the room tilted. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I didn't know the full story until recently. Lydia told me the truth after your mom started spinning her version of this week's drama. And to be honest, I was afraid of causing a rift. I thought maybe, if they were taking care of you, it'd all even out somehow." I laughed bitterly. "They weren't taking care of me. I was taking care of them." "I know that now," Clara said. "And I'm sorry. I really am." There was another long pause. Then she said, "Look, I don't know what you plan to do next. But if you want to fight this, legally, I have copies of the will. And Lydia's willing to talk." I didn't answer right away. My mind was racing. The pieces were falling into place, fast and sharp. My parents hadn't just taken advantage of my generosity. They'd stolen from me, lied to me, made me believe I was the burden, while they siphoned off what should have been mine and painted themselves as the victims in every chapter. And Rachel, she knew. Of course she knew. "I need some time to think," I finally said. "Take all the time you need," Clara replied gently. "And Ethan?" "Yeah. I'm proud of you for finally standing up for yourself, even if it took 5 years." I ended the call and sat in silence. Not just shock, not just betrayal, resolve. Because now it wasn't just about locking the door. It wasn't just about setting boundaries. Now it was about justice. And as I opened my laptop again, this time searching for a lawyer, I saw a new email from Rachel, subject line in all caps: "You have no idea what you've done." She was right. I didn't. But I was about to find out. I opened Rachel's email, already bracing for venom. I expected insults, maybe even threats about legal action. But what I saw was something different and far more revealing. You think you're a victim, but you're just selfish. You always were. Mom and Dad needed that money more than you. They raised you. They deserved it. All you ever did was sit back and act like they owed you something for letting them stay in that house. You think changing the locks makes you a hero? Newsflash, it makes you a petty little man. And if you go around telling people lies about inheritance or whatever Aunt Clara fed you, just remember, we're not the only ones with things to lose. That last line stuck with me. We're not the only ones with things to lose. It wasn't just passive-aggressive. It was calculated. A threat, cloaked in righteous indignation. That's when I realized this wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. This was a full-blown cover-up. They weren't just ashamed of what they'd done. They were terrified of being exposed. But the thing was, I wasn't scared anymore. I forwarded the email to myself, saved a backup to my external hard drive, and then replied with just 4 words. You'll hear from someone. The next day, I called the lawyer Clara had recommended. A man named Gregory Hahn, mid-50s, soft-spoken, but sharp as a razor. We met in his office downtown, and I brought everything. The copies Clara had mailed over, my bank statement showing years of grocery and utility purchases, and the message history with my parents, especially the ones where they'd implied I was too unstable to manage my own money. That last part made Gregory pause and raise an eyebrow. They said that about you? He asked, skimming the printout. For years. He tapped the table thoughtfully. We can work with this. It turned out, not only had my mother and Rachel convinced Aunt Lydia to hand over my portion of the inheritance, but they'd also forged a letter for me, dated during my final year in college, stating that I had voluntarily declined any share of the estate. I had never written that letter. When Gregory showed it to me, my jaw clenched. The signature looked vaguely like mine, close enough to pass if someone wasn't paying attention. But the wording was too formal, too polished, and I never called my grandmother Ms. Margaret in writing. I always wrote, Grandma, do you want to press charges? Gregory asked me quietly. Fraud, forgery, misappropriation of assets. It was a question I never thought I'd have to answer about my own family. I thought about it for a long time. I remembered the birthdays I spent alone while they were in Florida. The time I missed a doctor's appointment because they took my car without asking and left it with an empty tank. The way Rachel always joked that I was the backup plan for everyone else's mistakes. How my mom scoffed when I asked for help with groceries. How they made me feel like a burden in my own home. I looked Gregory in the eye. Yes, I said. I do. The next 2 months were a whirlwind. Gregory filed a formal complaint. Aunt Lydia submitted a notarized statement confirming that the money was meant to be split 3 ways, and that she had handed over Ethan's portion under false pretenses. Clara provided the family group email showing how my mother and Rachel coordinated financial decisions. And I provided years of financial records, medical documents, even the voice messages and text threads. When Rachel was served with the notice of pending legal action, she lost her mind. She started calling me nonstop. First it was pleading. This will ruin everything, Ethan. Please just drop it. Then came the rage, you're destroying your own family. Grandma would be ashamed of you. Then silence. But what really sealed their fate was what happened during deposition. My mother, flustered, defensive, slipped up. When questioned about the letter I wrote, she admitted, on record, that she had reworded it a little so it sounded more respectful. That was it. 1 sentence. But it was the crack in the wall. Gregory leaned forward like a lion spotting an opening. So to clarify, the letter wasn't written entirely by Ethan? She tried to backtrack. Well, he said something to that effect. I just made it clearer. Understood, Gregory said, with a smile that was almost sympathetic. That's all I needed. From there, it was like dominoes. Rachel's bank records showed multiple payments coming directly from an account connected to the estate. She tried to claim they were loans, but there were no repayment schedules. No notes. Just cash transfers labeled, thanks again, and you're the best. The court wasn't impressed. Within 3 weeks, the judgment came through. My parents and sister were ordered to repay my portion of the inheritance, plus interest. The total came to nearly $180,000. They were also fined for fraud and ordered to issue a written apology as part of the settlement. The letter had to be handwritten, signed, and filed with the court. But I didn't care about the money. Not really. I cared about the truth. Word spread fast. My extended family, who had always seen Rachel as the successful one, started reaching out to me quietly. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years sent messages like, "Good for you," and I always thought something was off about how they treated you. One even called and said, "I remember your mom bragging about paying off their mortgage in cash," and thinking, how the heck did she afford that? They knew. They all knew something. But no one said anything because, as Clara had put it so plainly, no one wants to cause a rift in the family. But I learned something through all this. Sometimes, the rift is already there. You're just the first person brave enough to stop pretending it's not. As for my parents, they moved in with Rachel, which was poetic in a way. She went from lecturing me about enabling them to sharing her guest bathroom and splitting grocery bills. Clara told me, not so quietly, that Rachel was already venting about how they eat like teenagers and leave crumbs everywhere. I didn't respond. I was too busy enjoying the peace. The house is quiet again. The fig tree's starting to bloom, and I've turned the spare room into a reading space with sunlight, a comfy chair, and no tension humming through the walls. I still feel the sting of betrayal sometimes. There are days when I remember a moment from childhood and wonder how deep the favoritism went. But it doesn't hurt like it used to, because I fought back. I stood up for myself, and I won. Not just the case, but the life I should have had years ago. A few weeks ago, I got a card in the mail. No return address. Just a cream envelope with careful handwriting. Inside was a single sentence, "I hope one day you can forgive us." Mom, I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded it up and slid it into a drawer, not because I forgave them, but because I no longer needed to hold on to the hurt. It had already done enough damage. And now? Now, I was free. My name's Steven, and I'm 29 years old. If you'd asked me 10 years ago what my future looked like, I probably would have laughed and said something stupid like, hopefully not living in my parents' basement. I didn't have some grand vision back then. I wasn't one of those kids coding apps in middle school or building robots in the garage. I was just quiet, observant. I liked taking things apart, seeing how they worked, tinkering alone. My older brother, Evan, was the golden child. He always had the spotlight, class president, football team captain, prom king, and later, the one with the real job. He majored in finance, wore suits even to casual family dinners, and somehow always had a story ready that made everyone laugh. My parents, especially my mom, treated him like the second coming of Steve Jobs. Meanwhile, I was the quirky one, the weird one, the one who just needs to figure it out. Growing up in that house felt like constantly trying to prove you existed. Evan's picture was framed in every hallway. Mine, maybe one, and it was cropped weirdly because my cousin had her eyes closed. When I got a B+ in physics, Dad would tell me, "Don't worry, not everyone's gifted." When Evan got a B+, it was, wow, that teacher must be brutal. It was subtle things. Death by 1,000 dismissals. At first, I tried to keep up. I joined the robotics club, thinking it might impress them. Mom said, "That's cute, sweetie. Just don't let it interfere with real responsibilities." When I landed a summer internship coding backend systems for a local tech company, Dad shrugged and said, "So, like IT support?" The thing that really stuck with me, though, the one I replay more than I probably should, happened at a family barbecue 2 years after college. I had just started working on a passion project, a SaaS tool meant to streamline virtual onboarding for remote teams. It was niche, yeah, but I believed in it. I mentioned it casually while flipping burgers at the grill, and my mom laughed. Actually laughed. "Steven," she said, in front of my aunts and uncles, "be honest. When are you going to be someone like your brother?" I wish I'd said something cool in the moment, something sharp and clever that made her freeze. But I just blinked and turned the burgers, pretending the smoke was making my eyes water. That moment stung, deeper than I thought it would. Not because it was new. It wasn't. But because I finally realized that no matter what I did, I would always be a side character in my own family. It didn't matter that I'd been paying my own rent since college, that I was teaching myself every programming language I could find, that I spent nights in front of a laptop until my vision blurred. All they saw was Evan's tailored suits and $70 haircuts. All they talked about was how his boss gave him box seats to a Knicks game, how his fiancée came from good people, how his LinkedIn said VP of Client Relations. Meanwhile, I was still figuring things out. The kicker? That same summer, my parents sat me down like it was an intervention. We were in the living room, and I remember Dad folding his hands in that serious way he did whenever he wanted to talk down to you. Mom leaned forward, like she was about to deliver tragic news. Evan sat smugly on the armrest with a beer in hand. "We've been talking," Dad said. "About your future." Mom chimed in. "You're not failing, Stephen. We just think it's time you consider something stable." Stable. That word grated me. They meant a job with a salary cap and a ceiling low enough to keep me from dreaming. "Something like what Evan's doing," Mom added gently, like I wasn't already bleeding from the comparison. I nodded, smiled, said I'd think about it. But something inside me snapped that day. It wasn't anger, not quite. It was colder, quieter, the kind of resolve that doesn't shout, but whispers, "Watch me." So I stopped trying to prove anything to them. I didn't bring up work, didn't show them progress. I let them believe I was still muddling through freelance gigs and barely scraping by. But behind the scenes, things were happening. My software gained traction, first with a few clients, then dozens. Then companies were offering to license it. I stayed heads down, said no to investors, focused on building it right, not fast. I lived like a monk, ramen and black coffee, cheap apartment, no distractions. I missed birthdays, skipped holidays, dodged family calls. Every hour they thought I was finding myself. I was building something that would change my life. Meanwhile, Evan was planning a wedding. A big one. Black tie, six-figure budget, country club venue. My parents were footing the bill, $60,000. I overheard Mom mention once like it was pocket change. "Well, we have to," she told my aunt. "Evan's our firstborn. He's done everything right." That line sat with me for days. I had launched my platform 2 months prior, and we had already hit $2.4 million in ARR. But sure, Evan had done everything right. Then came the wedding invitation. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't an invitation. It was a group text. My entire family, cousins, uncles, great-aunts, all in one massive thread, buzzing with excitement about Evan and Claire's big day. I was tagged like an afterthought. No personal message. No call. Just, "Let us know if you can make it, Stephen," beneath a sea of champagne emojis. I stared at that message for a long time. Did I want to go? No. Did I feel obligated? Maybe. But part of me needed to see it. Needed the confirmation that nothing had changed. That I still didn't belong. That they still saw me as a footnote to Evan's main story. And wow, did they deliver? I showed up in a basic black suit. No date. No fanfare. Sat at a table near the back. You know, the one next to the speakers and the emergency exit. I watched as my parents beamed during the father-son dance, Mom wiping tears, Dad gripping Evan's shoulder like he was passing down a crown. They toasted him like he was royalty. Said things like, "You've made us so proud," and "You've always been the light of our lives." I clinked glasses with a waiter who probably thought I was part of the catering team. But the real twist didn't come until the speeches. That's when Mom stood up, glass of champagne in hand, voice trembling with joy. "Some parents are lucky if one of their children finds success," she said. "But us? We hit the jackpot with Evan. From the moment he was born, we knew he was destined for something great." Then she glanced at me and smiled. "But Stephen's here too," she said, as an afterthought. "He's finding his way, and that's okay." The room laughed politely. I didn't. That night, I left before dessert. I didn't say goodbye, didn't leave a gift. Just slipped out while the DJ played Sweet Caroline, and my relatives screamed, "So good, so good, so good." I got into my car, drove back to my place, and stared at my laptop screen. We had just crossed $10 million in ARR. And no one knew. Not yet. But they would. Soon. When I say I went off the radar after that wedding, I mean it. No calls. No texts. No Facebook likes. I stopped replying to the occasional, just checking in, message from Mom, and I ignored the group chat completely, even when my cousins tried to loop me into some awkward birthday greetings. I told myself I was too busy, and I was. But the truth was, I didn't trust myself not to explode if I had to hear one more patronizing comment about how Evan's always been the leader, or "Stephen, you've got your own path, sweetie." I didn't want a path. I had a damn highway, and they were too busy polishing Evan's driveway to notice. But silence wasn't enough. Because even when I went quiet, they didn't. It started small. Mom left a voicemail asking if I could help Evan with some technical stuff. She said it like I was the family IT guy. I think her exact words were, "You know, the computer things. He's having trouble syncing some files on that cloud thing." I didn't respond. So Evan emailed me. Yo, it said, "No, hey. No, how are you? Just yo. Claire's laptop is stuck on some update screen. Can you look at it? No, please. No offer to pay. Just the assumption that I was available and obligated to fix things. I blocked his email. The next time I saw them was at Thanksgiving, 7 months after the wedding. I hadn't planned to go. I really hadn't. But part of me, the foolish, still wounded part, thought maybe things would feel different now that I was older, wealthier, and more in control of my life than I'd ever been. I didn't go to show off. I just wanted to be seen. For once. Big mistake. Dinner was at my parents' house, and nothing had changed. Same peeling wallpaper, same centerpiece Mom bought from the dollar store 6 years ago and insisted was rustic charm. Evan and Claire arrived 20 minutes late. Fashionable, of course, and Mom greeted them like they'd flown in from Paris. Me? I got a nod. A literal nod. The food was fine. Turkey dry. Potatoes lumpy. But the tension? Immaculate. Every time I tried to speak, someone cut me off. Every time Evan opened his mouth, the room turned to listen like he was reciting ancient prophecy. He told some story about a golf game with his boss, and Mom actually clapped. Then Dad launched into this tale about how proud they were of Evan's new financial management initiative, which I'm pretty sure was just him making a new spreadsheet at work. I said, "That's great," and went back to eating. But the real blow came after dessert. We were sitting in the living room, half the family asleep in armchairs, football humming quietly from the TV. Claire was showing off photos of their honeymoon. Italy, of course, and Evan turned to me casually, like we were old friends. "So, what have you been up to, little bro?" I blinked. "Working." He raised an eyebrow. "Still freelancing?" "Something like that," I said, keeping my tone flat. Mom cut in from across the room. "He's doing little app things, I think." "Aren't you, honey?" I stared at her. "I run a software company." She laughed. "Oh, Steven, you always make it sound so fancy." "It's real," I said. "We just hit our first major milestone." Dad looked up. "Milestone?" I shrugged. 91 million in valuation. The room went silent. Claire paused mid-scroll. Evan turned fully toward me now, the smugness wiped clean off his face. "Wait, what?" "We had our Series B 2 weeks ago," I said. "Raised a good chunk. We're expanding globally now." Mom blinked. "Steven, that's not possible. You never even studied business." "I studied problems," I said. "Then I solved one. That's how companies start." I wasn't even trying to be smug. I just wanted a moment where I could say something real and not have it reduced to a joke or shrugged off like I was still some awkward teenager. But that moment never came. Because instead of awe or pride, I got suspicion. Dad leaned forward. "So you're saying you're a millionaire?" "I'm saying the company is doing well." Evan scoffed. "And yet you drove here in a Toyota?" "It runs fine. You expect us to believe this?" Mom asked, her voice sharp now. "Steven, this isn't funny." "It's not a joke," I said. "I built something. From scratch. I didn't tell anyone because of exactly this." "You always had a habit of exaggerating," Dad muttered. And just like that, the conversation ended. They didn't ask questions. Didn't ask how I did it, what the product was, what it meant to me. They changed the subject. Someone made a joke about the turkey being dry, and the room laughed, and my $91 million truth was buried beneath gravy and deflection. I left early again. But the silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't peaceful. It was strategic. Because the next time I heard from Evan, he wasn't asking for tech help. He was asking for money. It was a text. No greeting. Just, "Yo, you got like 10K I can borrow? Claire and I are looking at a house." I didn't reply. He sent another the next day. "You there?" "Just alone. Parents said you're doing well now." That made me freeze. They told him? I hadn't realized how fast the news would spread. I thought the awkward Thanksgiving would just fade like all the others. But apparently, once they accepted it was real, or at least possible, they decided it was theirs to share. I wasn't a son to be proud of. I was a resource. Mom called 2 days later. "Steven, sweetheart," she said in that tone that always meant she wanted something. "Evan told us about the little chat at Thanksgiving. I just wanted to say, we are proud of you. We just didn't know you'd done so much." I said nothing. "And listen," she continued, "about your brother's house. He's a little short on the down payment. It would mean the world if you could help." "I don't think that's a good idea," I said flatly. She sighed. "Steven, it's family, and it's not like you're hurting." I hung up. She called again the next day, and the next. Then Dad joined in. Your brother needs a hand, he said. It's not like he's asking for much. You're in a position to help, and we're asking as your parents. I didn't ask you to pay for my apartment when I was eating ramen every night, I said. Where was the family then? That's different, he snapped. You chose to be stubborn. Evan's building a life. It hit me then, clear and hard, that they didn't see me as a person. Not really. I was a tool, a backup plan, a walking ATM with a quiet voice and no boundaries. And they had no shame. A week later, I got a group message from my mother. Another family gathering. A barbecue this time. My cousin was graduating, and we were all expected to bring a small financial gift to support his college plans. Mom added, Stephen, maybe you could cover the catering? You know, as your way of giving back. No one asked if I was coming. No one cared what I wanted. They just assumed that I would fund things, that I owed them, that I still played the same role, the quiet one, the background character, only now with a bigger wallet. I didn't go. That summer, Evan posted a photo on Instagram. Him and Claire standing in front of a new house. Caption, started from the bottom, now we here. My blood ran cold, because I recognized the house. It was one I had toured myself a few months back, when I was house hunting as a kind of therapy. It wasn't listed anymore. Sold, the agent had said. Full cash offer. A small part of me hoped it was a coincidence. Until the second photo. Claire's wrist. A new Rolex. Same model I had bought for myself the week after our series be closed. The price? $16,000. And I hadn't even worn mine yet. I scrolled back through the photos, my stomach tightening. New car. Renovated kitchen. Designer furniture. It added up, way more than Evan's job could justify. Then I checked my accounts. And my heart stopped. Because one of my private wallets, one I used for transferring investment gains, had a withdrawal. Not huge. Not big enough to notice unless you were tracking closely. But it was there. $3,000. Transferred out 2 weeks before Evan's house announcement. I scrolled further. Another transaction. $5,000 this time. A different wallet. Same week. Then one more. $4,000. Different dates. Different platforms. And all of them, connected to the same secondary email. One I didn't recognize. But I knew who it belonged to. Because it was a Gmail handle I'd seen before. On a shared Netflix account. Evan. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, my fingers numb. He hadn't asked me for money. He had taken it. And my parents, they either knew or didn't care. Either way, something in me shattered. Because this wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was theft. And that was the moment the line was crossed. Not just between us as brothers, but between me and the family I thought I could one day win back. No more. That night, I opened a private doc and started typing. Not notes. Not plans. Blueprints. Because if they wanted a villain, I could be one. But I'd be the kind that smiled in silence. And burned everything down while they toasted marshmallows over the ashes. When I tell people I've hit rock bottom before, they assume I'm talking about college, broke, ramen diet, living in a crappy apartment with paper-thin walls. But that wasn't it. That was just noise. The real bottom came after I realized my own brother had stolen from me, and my parents, either knowingly or blindly, had let it happen. That's the kind of pain that doesn't make a sound. It just settles in your bones and sits there, heavy. For a few days after I found those transactions, I couldn't work. I couldn't even open my laptop. I'd sit at my desk, the same desk where I'd spent years building something from scratch, and I'd stare at the screen like it had betrayed me too. I kept rereading the transfer logs, checking my security settings, trying to piece together exactly how Evan had gotten access. He didn't have the passwords, but he must have had something. A saved login from an old family device, maybe. Or maybe he'd watched me once, remembered an email, got curious, got lucky. However he did it, it wasn't just the money. It was the presumption that he could take from me and I wouldn't notice. That he deserved it more than I did. And worse, that no one would take my side if I confronted him. I tested that theory. I called my parents, voice flat and measured. I think Evan's been in my accounts, I said. I found several transfers. They're traceable. It links back to an old email he used. Silence. Then Dad. Are you sure you didn't just make those transfers and forget? I almost laughed. You think I misplaced $12,000? Mom jumped in. Maybe it was a business expense. You've said before you use lots of apps and tools. Maybe one billed you. I triple-check everything. And even if I didn't, it wouldn't link to Evan's email. More silence. Finally, Mom sighed. Stephen, honey, Evan wouldn't do that. He's not a thief. I was quiet for a long time. And if he did, what then? She didn't answer. She didn't have an answer. And that was the confirmation I needed. They didn't just fail to believe me. They refused to. Because if they admitted Evan had done something wrong, it would shatter the entire narrative they'd built. Golden child. Family man. Responsible firstborn. And they couldn't afford that. Not even for me. So I hung up. And for the first time in my life, I realized I had no family. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. I remember lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, thinking, what's the point of building an empire if the people you love think you're disposable? That question haunted me. For weeks, I moved on autopilot. I took meetings, nodded at investor pitches, signed off on design changes. But I wasn't there. I stopped going to the gym, stopped cooking, let my place get messy. I even let my beard grow out, which might not sound like much, but if you knew how obsessively I shaved every morning before work, you'd understand what that meant. It wasn't depression exactly. It was emptiness. Because I hadn't built that company just to make money. I'd built it because I thought it would finally make me enough. Enough to earn their respect. Enough to be seen. But now that I had it, the numbers, the headlines, the growth, all it had done was make me a bigger target. A golden ATM with no withdrawal limit. At one point, I even thought about selling. Taking the money, disappearing. Changing my name. Buying some quiet cabin in Oregon and going full ghost mode. But then something weird happened. I went to a coffee shop. That's it. Just a normal day. I needed air. Needed something to pull me out of the fog. I brought my laptop, told myself I'd answer a few emails, maybe reorganize our internal dashboard. The shop was noisy. Some college kid was doing a Zoom call too loudly in the corner, and a toddler was melting down over a muffin. But somewhere in the chaos, I heard someone say my name. Not Stephen, but my company name. Yeah, my team just on board with Oxen. That platform is wild. Saved us like 12 hours of setup time. Their UI is so smooth, it makes Google Docs look like Notepad. I turned. It was a guy in his late 20s, business casual, talking to what looked like a client. I didn't know him. He didn't know me. But he was talking about my product like it was the most normal thing in the world. I just sat there and listened. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something shift. I wasn't just a ghost behind a screen. I'd made something that mattered. Something real. Something useful. This guy didn't care that my parents thought I was the family screw-up. He didn't care that Evan had stolen from me. All he knew was that Oxen made his job easier. And that was enough. That moment didn't fix everything. But it cracked something open. So I leaned into the work. Not as a way to prove anything anymore. Just to build. To refine. To evolve. We just rolled out a new AI-based onboarding assistant. And the beta feedback was glowing. I dove into the next iteration, obsessing over every detail. I pulled long nights, not out of burnout, but out of flow. I reconnected with my co-founder, Mira, who I'd been unintentionally ghosting during my spiral. She didn't pry, didn't ask why I'd gone dark. She just sent me a GIF of Gandalf returning to Helm's Deep and said, "You good now?" I smiled. Getting there. We hired 3 new engineers. Brought on a consultant to prep for our Series C. I started taking interviews again, podcasts, tech blogs, even a segment on a startup YouTube channel with over 1 million subscribers. For the first time, I let my face be associated with the product. No more hiding. And something wild happened. People started messaging me. Old college friends. Former coworkers. Even a few distant cousins who had never bothered to speak to me at family reunions. They weren't asking for money. They were saying things like, "Dude, I had no idea that was you," or "I've been using Oxen for months. It's brilliant." I let those messages in. Let them replace the ones I'd been obsessing over. I started working out again. Nothing crazy, just light runs, home workouts. I got a haircut, cleaned my apartment, cooked a real meal. One night, I even invited Mira and a few team members over for dinner. We drank cheap wine, made terrible jokes, and stayed up talking until 2 a.m. And in that moment, I realized something. This was my family now. The people who saw me, who respected me, who didn't need to compare me to anyone else to know my worth. Still, there was a bruise under it all. A quiet ache that never fully left. I hadn't forgotten what Evan did, or what my parents didn't do. And even though I was rebuilding, even though I was stronger now, part of me still wanted something. Not revenge. Not exactly. Just truth. I wanted the truth out in the open. Not buried under holiday greetings and fake smiles. I wanted them to know that I knew, that I saw them clearly now, that their version of reality, where Evan was the hero and I was the broken one, was over. And that's when I started planning. Not a petty scheme, not a dramatic takedown. Something quiet, something undeniable, something that would force them to sit with the truth for once. It started with a visit to a lawyer. I didn't tell anyone. Not Mira, not my team. Just me and a notebook filled with transfer logs, screenshots, and old emails. I walked into that office with a folder under my arm and a storm in my chest. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Talia, took one look at my notes and said, "You've got a case." "I don't want to press charges," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "Then what do you want?" "I want proof. I want a record. I want something they can't spin. Something they see every time they try to lie about it." She nodded slowly. "We can do that." It wasn't about money. I'd already recouped the stolen amount tenfold in stock value that month alone. This was about narrative, about removing the mask. Talia helped me draft a letter. Not a cease and desist. Not a demand for repayment. Just a formal acknowledgement. One that laid out the facts, named names, and stated that the matter was documented. That it wouldn't be pursued legally for now. We mailed it to Evan's address. Certified. Signature required. 3 days later, I got the delivery confirmation. And 10 minutes after that, my phone started ringing. Mom, Dad, Claire, then Evan. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I poured myself a drink, sat by the window, and watched the city lights blink. They knew. Finally, they knew. And it was only the beginning. When I was younger, I used to fantasize about revenge in the dumbest ways. Getting a big promotion just to throw it in their faces. Showing up to Thanksgiving in a Lamborghini. You know, movie moments. Flashy. Loud. But after the letter, after the calls I ignored and the silence that followed, I didn't feel the urge to be loud anymore. I didn't want them to grovel. I wanted them to understand. To look around one day and realize everything had shifted, and they'd been too busy polishing Evan's shoes to notice the floor falling out beneath them. But to do that, I had to be methodical, strategic, precise, and I had to play the long game. The first step? Control the narrative. Not publicly. Not through some dramatic social media post. No, I didn't need the world to know what happened, just them. And more importantly, I needed them to feel powerless to stop it, which meant I needed to get closer before I pulled away. I started with Evan. After weeks of ignoring his texts and calls, most of which, to be fair, had dropped off after the letter, I finally replied to one message. "Let's talk." That's it. No emojis. No context. He answered in seconds. "Dude." "Yes." "When and where?" I suggested a bar downtown. Not too fancy, but upscale enough that he'd feel comfortable wearing his new Rolex, the one he bought with my money. I arrived 5 minutes early and got a booth in the back. He showed up late, of course, like he always did. Still had that confident walk, the same smug half smile, but there was a tension in his shoulders I hadn't seen before. He was trying to look relaxed, but I could see the panic bleeding through his shirt collar. He slid into the booth, glanced around, and gave me a forced grin. "Man, this is ya. Been a while, huh?" I nodded. "It has." Silence. He leaned in, lowered his voice. "Look, about the letter. You got it." Yeah, I got it. He rubbed his hands together like he was washing guilt off them. "I didn't mean to steal anything, bro, seriously. I thought it was an old account. I just needed a little cash and saw it still had money in it. I didn't think it'd matter." "You didn't think stealing would matter?" "I didn't know it was stealing at the time. I swear. He looked away, swallowed. "I was desperate." "For what? A Rolex and a down payment?" He flinched. "Claire was pressuring me. We were trying to get a place before the market jumped again. And Mom said you were doing well. So I figured." He stopped. He figured that I'd be fine with it, that I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't matter. "I didn't come here for an apology," I said. He looked confused. "Then, why are we here?" "To give you a choice." That got his attention. He straightened up. "A choice?" "Yeah. You repay me. With interest. Quietly. No drama. No excuses. Over time. Or I escalate." His lips parted, but I raised a hand. "And before you try to bluff, I have everything. Logs. Emails. IP addresses. Timestamps. And a lawyer who's very good at making noise." He stared at me for a long moment. I could see the gears turning. I knew Evan well enough to know he wasn't truly sorry, just cornered. Finally, he exhaled. "Okay, Fine. I'll do it. I nodded. Good. But, he added quickly, don't tell mom and dad, all right? They'll freak. It'll tear the family apart. I laughed. Not loudly. Just a small, bitter chuckle. I'm not the one who tore it apart, Evan. I left him with the repayment plan in writing. A document my lawyer had already prepped. Monthly transfers. Reasonable amounts. Just enough to sting. He signed without reading it carefully. Typical. But that was just step one. Because now that I had him where I wanted him, cooperating, silent, and nervous, I could move to step two. Rewriting the legacy. For years, every family event had been about Evan. His career, his wedding, his life. I had been background noise. And if I wanted to change that dynamic, not just for revenge, but for closure, I needed to become undeniable in their world, on their turf. So I started small. I sent my parents a gift. It was a framed newspaper article from a local business journal. Nothing flashy, just a clean layout. A photo of me, face finally public, and the headline. The quiet tech founder changing how teams work globally. Below that, an editor's note. Oxen Software, founded by Stephen L., just hit a valuation of $91 million after closing its Series B funding round, positioning it as one of the fastest-growing startups in the onboarding automation space. I didn't include a note, just the article. A week later, my mom texted me. Got your gift. Didn't know you were in the news. That's impressive. Impressive. From her, that was a whole monologue. Then, a few days later, came the next surprise. A dinner invitation. Not a group thing. Just me, Mom, and Dad. We'd love to catch up. Just the three of us. I accepted. And I planned everything. I showed up 15 minutes early. Reserved the table. Chose the restaurant. A quiet Italian place in the city. Tasteful, expensive, but not flashy. The kind of place that says I belong here without screaming it. I wore a simple tailored suit. No watch. No jewelry. Just confidence. When they arrived, they were clearly flustered. I don't think they'd expected me to look so composed. Mom hugged me awkwardly. Dad offered a handshake. We sat. They made small talk about weather, traffic, a cousin's baby. Then came the question. So, your company, Dad said, clearing his throat. Tell us more. We didn't realize it was doing so well. I smiled politely. It's been a good few years. A lot of hard work. I just wish you'd told us sooner, Mom added. We felt left out. I paused. I didn't think you were interested. She blinked. Of course we were. I tilted my head. Mom, last Thanksgiving you said I was finding my way. After I told you about the business. She looked down at her menu. I'm not trying to make you feel bad, I said. I'm just being honest. For a long time, it felt like you only saw what Evan did right. And what I did wrong. Dad shifted uncomfortably. That's not true. It is, I said, calmly. But I'm not here to argue. I just want you to know that I'm doing well. I'm happy. And I'm not the same kid who needed your approval. That landed. Hard. They didn't argue. They just sat with it. And for once, the silence wasn't dismissive. It was thoughtful. I didn't mention Evan. Didn't bring up the money. I wanted that to stay separate. This dinner wasn't about guilt. It was about establishing new boundaries. New rules. After that night, I started attending family events again. Not every one, but just enough to be visible. To remind them that I wasn't hiding anymore. And when people asked what I was doing these days, I told them, without shrinking, without apologizing. And slowly, I began to shift from Evan's brother to the one who built that software company. It helped that Oxen was everywhere now, startups, HR blogs, even a sponsored segment on a national podcast. My name was out there. My face. My story. And it wasn't long before my parents started bragging about me. The same people who once scoffed when I said I was coding now boasted to their neighbors that I led a global team. They didn't fully understand what I did, but they knew it mattered. Knew it was big. But that wasn't the end goal. That was just groundwork. Because now that the narrative had shifted, it was time for step 3. The reveal. Not to the world. To them. I waited for the perfect opportunity. And, as fate would have it, it arrived gift-wrapped. My cousin Danielle was getting married. Big event. Fancy venue. Full family guest list. The kind of thing where everyone showed up dressed like it was the Oscars, and everyone talked about everything except the couple. I knew Evan would be there. I knew Claire would too. And I knew they'd be smiling. But behind that smile, panic. Because he still hadn't finished paying me back. Not even close. And every month, when that transfer hit my account, He was reminded that I had him on a leash. But this time, I was ready to take it further. I was going to say something. Not publicly. Not with a microphone. Just carefully. Strategically. Enough to make everyone stop and think. Enough to finally pull the mask off. But what I didn't know, what no one knew, was that someone else was watching too. Someone who had their own score to settle. And they were about to hand me the perfect weapon. The wedding was held at a vineyard about 40 minutes outside the city. The kind of place with white linen tents, a candlelit aisle, and an open bar that didn't skimp on quality. Everything screamed tastefully expensive. And of course, Evan showed up in full peacock mode, tailored navy tux, his hair styled to perfection. Claire on his arm, wearing a designer gown that probably cost more than most people's rent. He spotted me before I even stepped onto the gravel path leading to the ceremony space. "Stephen," he said, voice dripping with fake warmth. Arms open like we were long-lost siblings in a Hallmark movie. "Didn't think I'd see you here." I smiled and gave him a polite nod. Family event. Wouldn't miss it. Behind the mask, I saw the flicker of nervousness. He hadn't seen me since our little bar meeting. He'd missed 2 repayment installments in the past 3 months. No explanation. No warning. I didn't remind him. I didn't have to. He was already sweating. Inside the reception hall, things unfolded the way they always did. Long speeches, polite clapping, endless rounds of "Aren't you going to settle down soon?" directed at me by distant relatives who barely remembered my last name. I sipped my wine and kept my head low. I wasn't here for a social hour. I was here for the final act. What Evan didn't know, what no one in my family knew, was that I hadn't come alone. Across the room, at a table near the floral arch, sat a woman in her late 30s, calm, composed, and perfectly out of place among the chiffon and pearls. Her name was Lydia. She was a forensic accountant. A very good one. I'd hired her 6 weeks earlier. After Evan missed his second repayment, I decided to dig deeper, not just into him, but into the web he'd woven. If someone like Evan had no shame in stealing from me directly, what else had he been getting into? What else had he convinced others to look the other way on? The answer? Plenty. See, Evan had been managing the family trust, a modest fund left by my grandfather to cover things like education, emergencies, and long-term care for extended relatives. The money wasn't massive, but it was important. It helped my aunt during cancer treatment. It paid for my cousin's grad school. It was sacred. And Evan? He'd been draining it. Small transfers. Reimbursements for expenses with no receipts. Fake invoices. Lydia traced every dollar. Over $78,000 gone. All routed to accounts linked to Evan's name or Claire's. And the best part? He had no idea anyone was looking. I waited until after the cake cutting, after the champagne toasts, after the dance floor had started to fill with relatives awkwardly swaying to 2000s pop songs. That was when I made my move. I approached Evan near the bar. He was laughing with one of our uncles, drink in hand. "Can I borrow you for a second?" I asked. He raised an eyebrow, but followed. I led him to the side patio, where string lights cast warm glows across the empty tables. Music thumped quietly behind us. "What's up?" he asked, already guarded. I handed him a manila folder. He frowned, opened it, and began to read. Page after page. Every transfer. Every account. Every timestamp. Lydia's cover letter summarizing her findings. His face went pale. "Stephen," he said, his voice small. This is ridiculous. This is taken out of context." I stepped closer, voice even. "You didn't just steal from me, Evan. You stole from the family. From Aunt Marlene. From Danielle's college fund. From Grandpa's legacy. I can explain." "No," I said sharply. "You won't. Because you won't have the chance." He looked at me, panicked. "What does that mean?" I handed him a second folder. Inside was a prepared statement of resignation from his position managing the trust. A formal letter admitting financial misconduct. Not legally binding, but emotionally devastating. The kind of thing that would end any goodwill he had left with the family. He shook his head, trembling. "You wouldn't." I tilted mine. "I already have." His eyes widened. And that's when I stepped aside and gestured to the door behind me. It opened. Lydia stepped out. But she wasn't alone. Behind her was Aunt Marlene, Danielle's mom, and my cousin Jonah, the one Evan had mocked years ago for choosing teaching over finance. They'd seen it all. He staggered back, face red, words failing. "No," he muttered. "No, you don't understand. It wasn't like that. You don't get to explain. Marlene said, voice cold. You get to listen. And listen he did. We didn't yell. We didn't insult him. We laid out the facts. Calm. Surgical. Then Lydia handed him the final document. A restitution agreement. Every cent he took from the trust, he'd pay it back, or face legal action. Evan's knees buckled slightly as he sat down on the edge of a planter. He knew he was finished. I walked away after that. Didn't need to stick around for the fallout. But I heard it was dramatic. Claire left the wedding early, in tears, apparently. Rumors spread like wildfire. By the next morning, half the family knew. And by the end of the week, Evan had been removed from every family group chat, blocked on 3 social media platforms, and quietly disinvited from my parents' anniversary party. As for my parents, that came next. They called me. Several times. I ignored the first few. Then I answered. It was my mom. Stephen, she said, her voice raw. What happened at the wedding? Is it true? All of it. Silence. Then, why didn't you tell us? You never listened, I said. Why would I keep trying? I heard her crying. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't hate her. But I didn't comfort her either. Because it wasn't my job anymore. We want to fix this, she said. No, I replied. You need to fix yourselves. I'm doing just fine. And I was. Better than fine. In the months that followed, Evan kept his head down. The repayments resumed. This time, larger and on time. My parents began asking real questions about my work. Not performative ones, genuine curiosity. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But I was done chasing their approval. I'd become something they never expected. Not just successful, whole. And I didn't need their spotlight to shine. A year later, I made a quiet donation to a local school in my grandfather's name. The same one Evan had siphoned from. They used it to build a new computer lab. I never told anyone. Not even the family. Because some victories don't need applause. Some are better lived in peace. I stood in that lab during the ribbon-cutting ceremony, watching kids play with programs I'd helped fund, building things from scratch, dreaming bigger than I ever had at their age. And I smiled. They'd asked me once, when are you going to be someone like your brother? The answer? Never. Because I became so much more. And they finally knew it. Thanksgiving dinner was supposed to be the one day of the year where my family pretended everything was fine. Instead, it turned into the night my dad humiliated me in front of everyone and flipped my entire world upside down. My name's Jason. I'm 27. And for the last year, I'd been living with my parents to save up for a down payment on my first house. It wasn't glamorous, but it made sense. Rent in our area was ridiculous, and my parents had insisted it was fine for me to stay as long as I needed, as long as I chipped in where I could. I paid the electric bill, internet, and even covered some groceries without complaint. I thought it was a fair arrangement. That night, the whole extended family was packed into the dining room. Turkey, stuffing, casseroles, the works. I had just passed the mashed potatoes to my cousin when Dad decided to make me the evening's entertainment. He clinked his glass and loudly said, "Everyone raise a toast to Jason, our resident freeloader." The table went quiet for a second before half the room awkwardly laughed. My ears burned hot, and I froze with my fork halfway to my mouth. "Dad?" I said carefully, trying to keep my voice even. "What are you talking about?" He grinned like he'd just told the funniest joke in the world. "You've been living here for almost a year now. No rent, free meals, free everything. It's about time you start pulling your weight. You're a grown man, not some teenager." The words hit me like a punch. I felt every pair of eyes at the table turn toward me. Some curious, some pitying, some downright judgmental. My little sister snickered under her breath. I wanted to sink through the floor. "I pay the electric bill, internet, and buy groceries every week," I said, my voice a little sharper now. Dad waved me off. "That's nothing compared to what it costs to keep this house running. We've decided you need to be out by December. You've had your free ride long enough." The rest of the night blurred together after that. I barely tasted the food. I barely heard my uncle trying to change the subject, or my mom giving me that look that meant, "Don't make a scene." All I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat and my dad's words replaying in my head. Freeloader, out by December, free ride. When dinner finally ended, I slipped out early, mumbling something about being tired. Upstairs in my room, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the walls that had once felt familiar and now just felt like a deadline. I wasn't a freeloader. I'd been doing everything I could to save responsibly, to build a future. And somehow, in my dad's eyes, that made me lazy, dependent. The humiliation burned hotter the more I thought about it. I remembered every snide comment he'd made over the past few months about kids these days and real men moving out at 18. This wasn't about money. This was about control. He liked having leverage over me, being able to hold this roof over my head like some favor I should be endlessly grateful for. By the time I fell asleep that night, I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to beg to stay. I wasn't going to explain myself. If Dad wanted me out by December, fine. But I wasn't leaving quietly. The next morning, I woke up with a strange, icy calm. I grabbed a notebook and started making a list. Every bill in my name, every subscription tied to the house, every shared expense I had been covering without fanfare. Electricity, internet, streaming services, the lawn service my parents loved but never paid for. One by one, I called or logged in online and scheduled cancellations effective immediately. As I unplugged my computer and started boxing up my things, I heard my parents laughing downstairs, probably thinking I was sulking. They had no idea I was already halfway gone. And for the first time since dinner, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. I spent the whole day quietly packing, loading my car with as much as it could hold, taking multiple trips to my small apartment across town. Every trip felt lighter, like I was shedding the weight of their judgment piece by piece. By midnight, my childhood room was empty except for the bare furniture. When I finally sat down on the floor of my new place, surrounded by boxes, I felt exhausted, but free. I knew the storm was coming once they realized what I had done. I knew Dad wasn't going to take this silently. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was back in control. And sure enough, the next morning, there was a thunderous knock on my apartment door. I opened the door to find my dad standing there, red-faced and fuming like he'd just run a marathon in the rain. He didn't even wait for me to invite him in. He just pushed past me into the apartment, his heavy boots thudding against the floor. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded, spinning around to face me. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "What does it look like?" "I moved out, just like you said." His face darkened. "You moved out last night? Without saying anything? Without even giving us time to talk about it?" I felt a bitter laugh bubble up in my chest. "You didn't give me time to talk about anything at dinner, Dad. You made a speech in front of the entire family. You told me I had until December. I decided to make it easy for you and be out early." "That's not what I meant," he snapped, pacing the small living room like a caged animal. "You were supposed to learn some responsibility, not run away and throw a tantrum." I bit my tongue hard to keep from saying something I'd regret. Tantrum. That was his word for any time I set a boundary he didn't like. "I didn't run away," I said slowly, choosing every word with care. "I moved out, which is exactly what you told me to do. I just don't see why I should keep paying for the house if I'm not living there." His head whipped toward me. "What do you mean, keep paying?" "I canceled the bills in my name," I said simply. "Electric, internet, streaming, everything. If I'm not using it, I'm not paying for it." He stopped pacing. For a moment, he just stared at me, his jaw working like he was chewing on something bitter. Then he let out a low, humorless laugh. "So that's how you want to play this? Fine. But don't come crawling back when you realize you can't afford to live on your own." I didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. He stomped out of the apartment, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. For the next few days, the phone call started. First it was my mom, soft-voiced and almost pleading. "Your dad didn't mean to embarrass you, Jason. He just wants what's best for you." "What's best for me?" I said. What part of calling me a freeloader in front of the entire family was supposed to help me? She sighed. "You know how he is. He wants you to grow up. Your sister moved out at 22. I cut her off. "Yeah, and she moved in with her boyfriend who paid all the bills. You've been praising her for years for being so independent when she was living rent-free somewhere else." There was a pause on the line, the kind that told me she knew I had a point but wouldn't admit it. "Your dad is under a lot of stress," she said finally. "The mortgage, the repairs." I almost laughed. "I've been helping with those repairs. I'm the one who installed the new router when the old one died. I'm the one who called the plumber when the upstairs bathroom flooded. But sure, I'm the problem." She didn't have much to say after that. Then came the text messages from my dad, each one shorter and angrier than the last. "Internet's out. Fix it. Lawn service didn't come. Call them. Do you think you're clever?" I didn't respond to any of them. The silence seemed to drive him mad because 2 days later, he showed up at my apartment again, this time with my younger sister in tow. She barely looked at me as they came in. My dad didn't bother with greetings. "You're going to turn those bills back on," he said flatly. "No, I'm not. This isn't just about you, Jason. Your mom and sister live there too. You're punishing them for no reason." I turned my eyes to my sister, who was scrolling on her phone like this was all beneath her. "Funny, you didn't say anything when Dad called me a freeloader," I said. "You laughed." She rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, are you still mad about that?" "It was a joke. A joke that ended with me being told to get out of the house," I shot back. Dad slammed his hand down on the back of a chair, making me flinch. "You are not going to sit here and make me the bad guy," he growled. "I gave you a roof over your head for almost a year, and this is how you thank me?" I stared at him, feeling something inside me harden. "I thanked you every month when I paid the bills. I thanked you when I cooked dinner for everyone while Mom was sick. I thank you when I helped pay off the new water heater. But none of that matters to you, does it? Because it wasn't about the money. It was about you feeling like you had control." For a long moment, the room was silent except for my sister's faintly tapping thumb on her phone screen. Then Dad straightened up, his face stone cold. "You'll regret this," he said finally. "Don't expect us to bail you out when you fall on your face." They left after that, slamming the door behind them once again. That night, I sat in my half-unpacked apartment, thinking about how quickly things had escalated. My family had gone from teasing me at dinner to showing up at my doorstep demanding I keep paying for a house I no longer lived in. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of it. The real storm was coming. I could feel it. My dad wasn't the type to let go of control easily. And judging by the way my mom and sister had been acting, they were going to side with him no matter what. But what they didn't realize was that something in me had shifted. I wasn't the kid who would cave after a few guilt trips anymore. If they wanted a fight, I was ready for one. And just as that thought settled in my chest, my phone buzzed with a message from my uncle, one of the few people at dinner who had stayed quiet. It simply said, "You need to hear what your dad's been saying about you." I stared at the screen, my pulse picking up. Whatever came next, I had a feeling it was going to change everything. I called my uncle back immediately, my hands still shaking from that text. He answered on the first ring, his voice low like he didn't want anyone else to hear. "Jason, I've been holding this in since Thanksgiving, but after today, you deserve to know." "Know what?" I asked, pacing my apartment. He sighed. "Your dad's been telling everyone in the family that you've been living off him without paying a dime, that you refuse to get a real job, that you sit around playing video games all day. He even told your grandparents that you drained his savings." I stopped pacing so fast it felt like my legs locked up. "What?" "Yeah," my uncle said quietly. "I tried to tell him that wasn't true, that I know you've been working and helping out, but he wouldn't hear it. He said it was time you learned some tough love." My stomach turned over. "He told Grandma and Grandpa that." "Not just them," my uncle said. "Cousins, aunts, uncles, everyone. That's why everyone was so quiet at dinner. They already thought you were freeloading before you even sat down." I sank into my couch, gripping my phone so hard my knuckles went white. No wonder everyone had been looking at me like I was some lazy teenager who refused to grow up. Dad had poisoned the well before I even had a chance to defend myself. "Jason," my uncle added gently, "I know this hurts, but you need to hear it straight. He said he was cutting you off financially, and that if you tried to come back home after December, he'd change the locks." My throat tightened. I hadn't asked for money once since moving back in. I had been helping them, supporting them. And now he was out there rewriting history to make himself look like the martyr. After I hung up, I just sat there in the quiet, my mind running through every interaction of the past year. The time I paid the entire electric bill when my dad's hours got cut back at work. The time I stayed home from a friend's birthday to wait for the plumber so Mom wouldn't have to. The countless times I bit my tongue when Dad made some comment about kids these days, while I was working late on my freelance projects. It all felt poison now. A few hours later, I got confirmation of what my uncle had said in the worst possible way. A group text from my grandma asking if I was finally getting serious about life. I stared at my phone in disbelief. "What do you mean, Grandma?" I typed. She replied almost instantly. "Your father told us you'd been refusing to contribute to the household and wasting your money on gadgets. We were worried you'd never grow up." I felt my ears go hot. My dad had actually said that to them, my grandparents, the people I had spent every summer helping with their garden, who had once told me I was their most responsible grandson. I paid for the electricity, the internet, and half the groceries. I wrote back, my fingers trembling. I moved out because your son told me to do it in front of the entire family. There was a long pause before she replied. Oh, that single word nearly broke me. The next day, the real betrayal dropped like a hammer. My bank app sent me an alert. My checking account was overdrawn. Confused, I opened it and saw a massive automatic payment had gone through. The property tax bill for my parents' house. My heart slammed against my ribs. That bill was supposed to be in my dad's name, but last year he had added me as a secondary account holder just in case. I had agreed, thinking it was a backup measure, never realizing it meant I could be charged directly. I called the bank immediately. This charge shouldn't have come from my account, I said, my voice tight. The woman on the phone was polite but firm. Sir, you are listed as an authorized payer on the account. The automatic withdrawal uses both names. I felt sick. My dad had known this would happen. He had known my savings were sitting there waiting for my house down payment, and he had let it drain me dry for his property tax. When I called him, my voice was shaking, not with fear this time, but with rage. You emptied my account. It's not your account, Jason. It's our house, he said coolly. You live there, you benefited from it. You should contribute. You told me to leave. I shouted. You humiliated me in front of everyone, and now you're taking my savings? He didn't even flinch. Consider it rent for the past year. Something inside me snapped then. It wasn't just humiliation anymore. It was betrayal, pure and simple. My own father had sabotaged me financially, slandered me to the family, and now stood there acting like I owed him for the privilege. I'm not giving you another cent, I said through gritted teeth. Not now, not ever. He chuckled, that infuriating little laugh that always meant he thought he'd won. We'll see about that. I hung up on him, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I sat there for a long time, staring at the floor, letting the weight of everything settle over me like a storm cloud. The damage was done, my savings were gone, my family thought I was a selfish freeloader, and I had no idea how I was going to pay rent next month. For the first time, I felt something dangerously close to despair. But under the despair, under the hurt, a different feeling started to take root. Cold, steady, and sharper than anything I'd felt before. If my dad wanted to turn this into a war, then fine. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to make sure he regretted ever underestimating me. And as if fate wanted to fuel that fire, later that night I got a call from my old neighbor, Mr. Lambert. Jason, I heard what happened. Your dad's been telling people you're unstable, he said. But I thought you'd want to know. He's been talking about selling the house. Selling the house. That changed everything. I barely slept that night. The idea of my dad selling the house churned in my mind like a storm I couldn't escape. That house wasn't just where I grew up. It was the place I had been helping to keep running for years. The thought of him cashing out, walking away with the money after draining my savings and humiliating me felt like the final twist of the knife. The next morning, I woke up with that same heavy weight pressing down on me, but now there was something colder behind it. I went to my laptop and pulled up my bank account again, staring at the pitiful balance. I had been so careful, so methodical about saving every spare dollar for a down payment, and now half a year's worth of careful planning was gone in one transaction I hadn't even authorized. I spent the morning going through every automatic payment, every account with my name on it, every bill I had ever shared with my parents. I started calling companies one by one, removing myself as an authorized payer on everything: utilities, property taxes, even the backup contact info for the mortgage company. Every call was exhausting, like slowly cutting through invisible threads that had tied me to that house for years. In the middle of this marathon of calls, my phone buzzed with another group text from the family. My aunt had sent a long paragraph praising my dad for doing the hard thing by forcing me to grow up. She ended it with, "We're all proud of you for finally moving out, Jason. Your dad said you might be struggling, but he's hoping this will teach you responsibility." I just stared at the screen, numb. They didn't see me as responsible at all. They saw me as some cautionary tale about adult children who wouldn't leave the nest. My dad had rewritten the entire narrative, and they had all bought it. That afternoon, I went to work, trying to distract myself with something, anything, but it felt impossible to focus. Every email from a client, every task I completed felt hollow. All I could think about was how easily my own family had turned against me, how quickly they had taken his side without ever asking for my version of events. By the time I got home that night, I felt drained in every sense of the word, physically, emotionally, financially. I sat on the edge of my bed in my half-unpacked apartment, staring at the piles of boxes that I still hadn't bothered to sort. I had wanted this place to feel like a fresh start, but right now, it just felt like exile. And yet, somewhere under the exhaustion, a different kind of resolve started to form. If I couldn't rely on my family, I'd have to rely on myself. I wasn't going to crawl back to them, no matter how much pressure they put on me. That weekend, I went back to my parents' house one last time, quietly, while they were out running errands. I didn't take anything except the few remaining tools and personal items I had left in the garage. I didn't leave a note. I didn't slam any doors. I just made sure there was no reason left for them to call me about forgetting something. Standing in my old bedroom for the final time was surreal. The walls were bare, the carpet still faintly indented where my bed had been. I remembered being a kid and staring up at the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck to the ceiling. I remembered staying up late studying for exams, the sound of my parents' TV murmuring down the hall. All of it felt distant now, like memories from a life I no longer recognized. Before I left, I took one long look around and said out loud, "You don't get to control me anymore." It was quiet, almost a whisper, but it felt like the first real step toward cutting ties. The following days were quiet, almost eerily so. My dad must have realized I wasn't answering calls or texts because he switched tactics. My mom started calling instead, her voice soft and guilt-laden. "Your father is just worried about you," she said one night. "He didn't mean to take your savings. He thought you'd be grateful for the lesson." I had to bite back the bitter laugh that rose in my throat. "Mom, that wasn't a lesson. That was theft. And the worst part is, he's proud of it." "He's not proud," she protested weakly. "He's just stubborn. He thinks he's helping you. Helping me by emptying my account and turning the whole family against me?" I asked. She didn't have an answer for that. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and started writing everything down. Every bill I had paid, every grocery trip I had covered, every repair I had handled. I dug through my bank statements and pulled receipts where I could. I wasn't sure why I was doing it yet. Part of me thought maybe I'd send it to the family group chat just to show them how wrong they were. Another part of me thought I might need it for something bigger later. Meanwhile, I started picking up extra freelance projects, even if it meant working late into the night. Every dollar I earned felt like a small piece of my independence coming back. It wasn't easy. There were nights where I sat hunched over my laptop until my eyes burned, wondering if I was pushing myself too hard. But it felt better than sitting in silence, letting my dad's version of events define me. And slowly, very slowly, the fog of hopelessness started to lift. One Friday evening, I got a text from Mr. Lambert again. "Saw your dad outside with a realtor today. Looked serious." I stared at the message for a long time, my mind working through the implications. If my dad was selling the house, then everything I had paid toward utilities, groceries, and repairs over the past year had effectively been helping him raise the value of his property before cashing out. That was when the first spark of a plan started forming in my head, not just to defend myself, but to hold him accountable. I didn't know exactly how yet, but as I sat there, staring at my growing folder of receipts and documents, I realized I wasn't powerless. And this time, I wasn't going to wait for him to make the next move. The next few weeks became a blur of work, late nights, and relentless focus. I poured every ounce of my energy into rebuilding myself financially and mentally. It wasn't easy. There were nights I could barely keep my eyes open at my desk, but each project I finished felt like a brick laid in the foundation of a new life, one that no longer had my dad's thumb pressing down on it. My freelance business, which had always been a side hustle, suddenly became my full-time obsession. I started reaching out to old clients, reconnecting with contacts I hadn't spoken to in months, and taking on jobs I might have declined before. To my surprise, work began to snowball. Clients referred me to their colleagues, small projects turned into retainer contracts, and before I knew it, I was making more than I ever had while living at my parents' house. The first time I saw my new bank balance break, even with what I had lost to the property tax withdrawal, I sat back in my chair and just breathed. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the feeling that I was finally clawing my way out of the pit they had thrown me into. At the same time, my mental state started to shift. Where I had once been replaying every argument with my dad on a loop, now I was thinking about the future. I started setting up my apartment properly, hanging pictures on the walls, putting together the bookshelf I had left in pieces, even buying a decent couch instead of living with the hand-me-down futon I'd been using. Slowly, the place started to feel like home instead of a crash pad. I also began talking to people again, friends I had been avoiding since the drama with my family started. I told a few of them what had happened, and their outrage was a strange comfort. "He did what?" my friend Marcus said when I told him about the property tax. "That's not tough love, man, that's financial abuse." Hearing someone else say the words out loud was like having a weight lifted from my chest. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. What my dad had done was wrong. And then, one day, almost by accident, I stumbled across the leverage I didn't know I had. I was cleaning out some old files on my laptop when I found a PDF my dad had sent me nearly a year ago, copies of receipts for some major home repairs. He had asked me to look them over because he wasn't sure if they qualified for a tax credit. As I clicked through the file, I noticed something odd. Several of the receipts had my name listed as the person who paid, because I had used my credit card for the purchase and he had paid me back later. Except, as I dug through my old bank statements, I realized he had never actually reimbursed me for a few of them. I stared at the numbers, my mind working fast. Not only had I been covering utilities and groceries, I had directly paid for thousands of dollars worth of home improvements, new insulation, roof repairs, a water heater installation. And all of it was in my name. That's when it hit me. If Dad really was selling the house, these improvements would raise the value. In other words, I had contributed financially to an asset I didn't own, an asset he was about to cash out of completely. That night, I stayed up late compiling everything into a single, meticulously organized folder. Every receipt, every bank statement, every invoice with my name on it went in. I created a spreadsheet showing exactly how much money I had spent on their household over the past year, down to the penny. The number at the bottom was staggering, far more than I had even realized. The more I worked, the calmer I felt. This wasn't just anger anymore. This was strategy. Meanwhile, life outside of my family drama kept improving. My new clients kept renewing contracts, and I even raised my rates for the first time in years, something I had been too nervous to do before. To my shock, not a single client balked at the increase. By the end of the month, I had not only replaced the money that had been stolen from my account, but had enough left over to open a separate savings account, one my dad would never have access to. The best part? My landlord offered me a chance to take over the slightly larger corner apartment in the building when the current tenant moved out. It had better light, a small balcony, and just enough extra space for an office. I signed the new lease without hesitation. Moving into that apartment felt like crossing a threshold into a different life. I unpacked everything properly this time, set up my workspace by the window, and hosted a small get-together with friends to celebrate. For the first time in months, I laughed without feeling like there was a shadow hanging over me. But the best moment came a week later when I ran into Mr. Lambert again while I was picking up coffee. "You were right," he said with a knowing look. "Your dad's house is officially listed. I saw the realtor's sign go up yesterday." I smiled, just a small, private smile, but inside, something clicked into place. The timing was perfect. The house being on the market meant everything I had paid into that home was about to directly increase the profit my dad would pocket. And I wasn't about to let him walk away thinking he had won. So I kept working, kept saving, and kept compiling more documentation. I pulled credit card statements going back 2 years. I downloaded every Venmo and PayPal transaction showing me paying for groceries or repairs. I even dug up text messages where my dad had thanked me for covering certain bills. Piece by piece, the folder grew thicker, more detailed, and more undeniable. I didn't know exactly how I was going to use it yet, whether it would be for legal action, for leverage, or just to finally set the record straight with the family. But for the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt like I had power again. And then, as if fate was waiting for me to be ready, I got an email from a cousin inviting me to a family dinner at my parents' house to celebrate the upcoming sale. I stared at the invitation for a long time, a slow smile spreading across my face. If they wanted me back under that roof, even for one evening, maybe it was time to finally show them the truth. When I saw the invitation to the celebration dinner, my first instinct was to delete it. The idea of sitting in my parents' house, smiling politely while everyone congratulated my dad on selling the home he had essentially stolen my money to maintain, made my stomach twist. But as I stared at the email, something shifted. This was an opportunity. It was rare that my entire extended family was in the same place. If I wanted to clear my name, if I wanted to shatter the carefully crafted narrative my dad had been spreading for months, this was my chance. I wouldn't just defend myself in a one-on-one argument that could be twisted later. I would do it in front of everyone, where there'd be no denying the truth. But if I was going to do it, I needed to do it right. For the next several days, I focused on perfecting my folder of evidence. It wasn't enough to have a pile of receipts. I needed a clear, compelling way to present them. So I spent hours creating a timeline. I went through every month of the past year and listed what I had contributed: electric bills, internet bills, grocery payments, repairs, even the times I had personally paid for home improvements. Next to each expense, I added screenshots of the receipts or bank transactions. I included texts from my dad thanking me or asking me to handle something, just to remove any doubt about who had initiated or covered the cost. When I finished, I exported the entire thing into a clean, professional-looking PDF that I could display on my tablet or email to anyone who asked for proof later. I even made a one-page summary with the final dollar amount in bold at the bottom. Seeing the number again made my jaw tighten. It was almost the exact amount my dad stood to profit from selling the house after realtor fees. It was as if my entire year's contributions had been converted directly into his equity. While I was compiling all of this, I got another call from my uncle, the one who had tipped me off months ago. "I don't know if you've heard," he said, "but your dad's been telling people that you're jealous of him selling the house. He's saying you wanted to stop him from moving into a nicer place." I felt a dark, humorless laugh rise in my chest. Jealous? I paid for that house to stay standing, Uncle Rick. He should be thanking me. My uncle hesitated, then said quietly, "I believe you. And if you ever decide to tell everyone your side of the story, I'll back you up. People need to hear the truth." That was when I knew I wasn't crazy for wanting to do this. Still, I didn't want to walk in unprepared for my dad's anger. I spent the week before the dinner quietly getting my ducks in a row. I called the bank to confirm the property tax withdrawal had indeed come from my account and requested an official statement. I emailed the contractor who had done the roof repairs and asked for a copy of the invoice with my name listed as the payer. He sent it to me within an hour. I even spoke to a lawyer friend of mine, just to ask some hypothetical questions. If someone contributed to the upkeep of a house they didn't own, and then the owner sold that house, is there any way to recover that money? I asked. "Depends on the evidence," she said. "But if you have records showing you paid for major repairs or improvements, you could argue for reimbursement, especially if you can prove there was an understanding that those payments were temporary or would be reimbursed." That answer lit a fire under me. I wasn't just going to embarrass my dad in front of the family. I was going to put him in a position where he couldn't just shrug it off. The night before the dinner, I sat in my apartment staring at my packed folder. Next to it sat a small voice recorder I had borrowed from a friend. I wasn't planning to provoke an argument, but if my dad decided to lash out or admit something in front of everyone, I wanted a record. On the day of the dinner, I dressed carefully, neat, professional, but not overly formal. I wanted to look calm, composed, and impossible to dismiss. When I arrived at the house, I felt a strange mix of nostalgia and adrenaline. The familiar driveway, the squeaky front step, the smell of Mom's cooking. It all felt the same, but I didn't feel like the same person walking through that door. My dad greeted me at the entryway with a look that was somewhere between smug and suspicious. "Glad you could make it," he said, as though he were granting me a favor. I just smiled politely. Wouldn't miss it. As the evening went on, I stayed quiet and observant, listening as my relatives congratulated my parents on finally moving on to something better. My sister made a few digs at me under her breath, little comments about how Jason finally figured out how to stand on his own 2 feet, but I let them roll off me. I wasn't here to argue. I was here to wait for the right moment. And then, halfway through dinner, my dad decided to start holding court. "Selling this place was the best decision we ever made," he announced proudly. "It's time we stop carrying everyone else on our backs. Some people need to learn what real life is like." He glanced at me as he said it, just enough to make sure everyone knew who some people meant. I set my fork down slowly and wiped my hands with my napkin. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out steady. "Actually, since we're all here, I'd like to clear something up." The table went quiet. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder, sliding the one-page summary across the table to the nearest relative. This is everything I contributed to this house over the past year. Utilities, repairs, groceries, even home improvements. Total comes out to just under $15,000. I just thought everyone should have the full picture before we keep talking about who's been carrying who. The paper passed from hand to hand. I watched their expressions shift as they read the numbers, some of them looking shocked, others glancing between me and my dad. My dad's face went red. "This isn't the time or place for this," he said sharply. "Sure it is," I said, keeping my tone calm. "You made it the time and place when you told everyone I was a freeloader. I just thought they'd want to see the receipts." For the first time in months, the room wasn't laughing at me. It was silent, and all the weight of that silence was on my dad. And that was just the beginning. The silence in the dining room stretched until it was almost unbearable. You could hear the clink of a fork somewhere down the table as one of my cousins absent-mindedly set it down, the metal against the china ringing like a bell. All eyes were on me, and more importantly, on my dad. He cleared his throat, forcing a laugh that sounded much thinner than usual. "Jason, this is petty. You're really going to bring up a few bills at a family dinner." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "It's not a few bills, Dad. It's nearly $15,000. That's more than half a year of rent in this area. I wasn't freeloading. I was keeping this house running." I tapped the folder with one finger. "And I have all the proof. Every receipt, every transaction. Which means when you told Grandma and Grandpa I was sitting around doing nothing, you were lying. When you told everyone I didn't contribute, you were lying. And when you emptied my account for the property tax, you weren't teaching me a lesson, you were stealing." Gasps went around the table. My grandma, sitting across from me, frowned and looked at my dad. "You took his money?" she asked, her voice sharp. Dad's face flushed an even deeper red. He was living under my roof. That money went toward keeping a roof over his head. I leaned back in my chair, calm as ever. "So just to be clear, you admit you took money from my savings account?" That was the moment I saw it click for him that this wasn't going the way he'd expected. His jaw clenched. "You were listed on the account, Jason. That makes you responsible too." I smiled faintly. "I've already spoken to the bank and gotten a written statement confirming that the payment wasn't authorized by me. I also spoke to a lawyer friend. They said that since I have documentation of everything I contributed, and since you've now admitted in front of witnesses that you took money without my permission, I'd have a strong case for reimbursement." The table was dead silent. My mom looked pale. My sister, who had been smirking a moment earlier, was now staring down at her plate. I let the silence stretch for a beat before I continued. "But honestly, I don't care as much about the money anymore. What I care about is my reputation. You've spent months telling this entire family that I'm lazy, that I'm ungrateful, that I've been living off you. Tonight, you're going to tell them the truth." Dad's mouth opened and closed. Not later," I said softly but firmly. "Now." Grandma crossed her arms. "I think we all deserve to hear the truth, Charles." I watched him squirm. For the first time in my life, he didn't look like the man in charge of the room. He looked cornered. Finally, after what felt like forever, he muttered, "Fine. Jason paid the utilities. And other things." "That's not good enough," I said, my voice still calm but ironclad. "You told them I did nothing. Say it clearly." His fists clenched on the table, but the weight of everyone's stares seemed to pin him in place. "Jason helped with the bills," he said stiffly. He paid for a lot. More than I told you." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just nodded, gathered my folder, and stood up. That's all I wanted to hear. I turned to leave, but then stopped in the doorway. "Oh, one more thing," I said, pulling out my phone. "I recorded this conversation, just in case anyone forgets what was said tonight." You could have heard a pin drop. My dad's face was frozen in fury, but he didn't say a word. I left the house to a room full of stunned silence, my heart pounding, but not with fear. For the first time in months, I felt like I was breathing freely. When I got back to my apartment, I sent a copy of the PDF to the family group chat with a single message. "Here are the receipts for those of you who wanted the truth." Within minutes, messages started coming in. Some were quiet apologies. A few were awkward excuses about not wanting to get involved. But the one that made me pause was from Grandma. "Thank you for showing us this, Jason. I wish we'd known sooner." And then, an hour later, a message from my uncle. "Your dad is furious, but he needed to be called out. Proud of you." I sat back, letting out a long breath. The power dynamic had shifted completely. I wasn't the family scapegoat anymore. I had the proof, the witnesses, and the calm control that my dad couldn't match. And while I hadn't decided yet whether to pursue legal action for the money he took, I knew one thing for sure. I had taken back my voice and made sure everyone heard it. But then, just as I was starting to relax, I got another message from my uncle. He's talking about canceling the sale of the house out of spite. It read, "I think he's about to do something drastic." My pulse quickened. This wasn't over yet. If my dad was willing to blow up his own plans just to get back at me, then I needed to be ready for whatever came next. The next few days after the dinner felt like living in the eye of a hurricane, strangely quiet but charged with tension, as though something big was about to happen. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from relatives. Some were supportive, telling me they were proud of me for standing up for myself. Others were awkwardly neutral, clearly trying to stay out of it. But the one person who didn't message at all was my dad. Then, 3 days later, I got a call from my mom. Her voice was tight, clipped, like she'd been crying. "Your father canceled the sale," she said. "He says if you think you're owed anything, you won't get a dime of it now. He's not letting the house go just so you can profit from his hard work." I sat there in stunned silence for a moment, letting her words sink in. He was willing to keep living in a house he clearly didn't want anymore, just to make sure I didn't win. "Mom," I said slowly, "I don't want his money. I want my money. The money I paid. The money he took." She let out a frustrated sigh. "Jason, he's not going to change his mind. He says you humiliated him. He says you made him look weak in front of the family." "Good," I said, my voice flat. "He needed to look weak. He was wrong, Mom. And you know it." She didn't answer right away, but I could hear her breathing on the other end. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "I know." That night, I opened the folder of evidence one last time and made a decision. I emailed it directly to my dad with a short message. "Either you reimburse me for the amount I've contributed in the last year, or I will file in small claims court. I have the bank statement confirming the property tax withdrawal, the invoices for the repairs, and the receipts for every bill. If you refuse, you will not only lose in court, but everyone will know exactly why." I hit send and sat back, heart hammering. For 2 days, there was silence. Then, early on the third morning, there was a knock at my apartment door. When I opened it, my dad was standing there, not red-faced and shouting like before, but looking worn down, older somehow. He stepped inside without waiting for me to invite him, but there was no anger in his movements this time, just exhaustion. "You really would take me to court?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I said, "and I'd win." He sank down onto my couch, rubbing his temples. "You've been planning this for months." "I've been documenting everything for months," I corrected him. "Because I knew if I didn't, you'd twist it into a story where I was the problem. I'm not going to let you take from me and make me the villain." For a long time, he didn't say anything. Then, finally, he reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, setting it on the coffee table between us. "This covers the utilities and the property tax." I stared at it for a long moment before picking it up and opening it. Inside was a cashier's check for the exact amount I had listed on my one-page summary. "This doesn't mean I forgive you," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "You tried to destroy my reputation with the family. You tried to make me small so you could feel big. That won't work anymore." He flinched, like I'd struck him. "I just wanted you to grow up," he said, his voice low. "I did grow up," I said, standing up so I was looking down at him. "Just not the way you wanted. I don't need your approval anymore, Dad. And I don't need your house. I have my own life now." He looked like he wanted to argue, but the fight seemed to drain out of him. After a moment, he just nodded, stood up, and left without another word. When the door clicked shut behind him, I sat back down on the couch, holding the check in my hands. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about finally being seen for the truth, finally taking back my dignity after months of being painted as the family screw-up. Later that evening, I sent one last message to the family group chat. "Dad reimbursed me. I'm glad this is finally settled. I'm moving forward with my life, and I hope everyone else can too." There were a few replies, some relieved, some quietly supportive, but the one that stood out was from my grandma. "I'm proud of you, Jason. You handled this with grace. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small again." I put my phone down and looked around my apartment, the apartment I had built from nothing, the apartment that was finally filled with my things, my work, my peace. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. Not the bitter, hollow kind I'd been forcing for months, but a real one. This time, the silence in the room felt different. It didn't feel heavy or suffocating. It felt like freedom. And as I stood there looking out the window, I realized I wasn't just free of the house, or the bills, or even my dad's control. I was free of the need for his approval, and that was worth more than any check he could ever write. The next morning, I took the check to the bank, deposited it, and walked out feeling 10 pounds lighter. I wasn't just leaving the past behind, I was cashing it in. And when I passed by the street where my childhood home sat, with the for sale sign still in the yard, I didn't feel anger or sadness anymore. I just felt done. I rolled down the window, looked at the house one last time, and said quietly to myself, "Good luck without me." Then I drove away, the sun coming up over the horizon, and didn't look back. I'm Corey, 33, and I guess you could say my family and I have always had a complicated relationship. The kind of we love you but also secretly resent you dynamic that makes every holiday feel like walking into a lion's den wrapped in a gift bough. It wasn't always that way, though. Growing up, I was the quiet one, the kid who stayed out of trouble and tried to keep peace while my older brother, Evan, was the golden child, the loud, charming, football-playing, dad's favorite type. He could do no wrong, even when he very obviously did. For most of my life, I just accepted that. You learn early on that fighting for fairness in a family like ours is like arguing with a brick wall. It only leaves you exhausted. But I still tried. I helped my parents when they got older, fixed things around their house, covered bills when they forgot to pay something. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd notice that while Evan chased get-rich-quick schemes and borrowed money from everyone he knew, I was the one actually showing up. That illusion shattered on my 33rd birthday. It started innocently enough, a small family gathering at my mother's house. I hadn't really wanted to go, but my mom insisted. "Come on, Corey, it's just dinner. We haven't all been together in months." I should have known better. Whenever she said family dinner, it meant Evan holding court at the table, everyone pretending not to notice the tension floating in the air like static. I arrived with a simple bottle of wine and a quiet smile, hoping to get through the night without incident. My mother greeted me with her usual half hug, the kind where her arms barely touch your shoulders. My father was in his chair, already watching the news at full volume. And then there was Evan, loud, confident, smirking like he owned the place, with his wife and their son, Tyler, who was around 12 and clearly inherited his father's arrogance. "Corey, look who decided to show up," Evan called out, clapping me on the back like he was doing me a favor. "What's it been, 6 months? Thought you finally moved out of the state to chase another one of your big ideas." I forced a smile. "Nope, still here, just busy with work." "Work?" he repeated, grinning at his son. "That's when you sit at a computer all day pretending to make money." Tyler laughed, an obnoxious, forced sound that made my skin crawl. My mother chuckled too, which stung more than I expected. Dinner went the way it always did, Evan dominating the conversation, boasting about his new business venture, which was apparently flipping used cars with some guy from his gym. My father nodded approvingly, as if Evan had just discovered electricity. I sat there, quietly eating, until my mother brought out a small cake with candles and said, "All right, everyone, let's sing for Corey." We sang. It was awkward. I smiled and thanked them. And then, out of nowhere, Evan stood up, grinning like he was about to make a toast. "Before we cut the cake," he said, "Tyler's got something for Uncle Corey." The kid perked up, a mischievous look in his eyes. He reached behind his chair and pulled out a small, wrapped box. "Here," he said, tossing it across the table toward me. I caught it midair, surprised. "Thanks, buddy," I said, trying to sound genuine. "Can I open it?" Tyler smirked. "Sure, but you might not like it." I peeled back the wrapping paper, and inside was a small, cheap plastic trophy, the kind you'd get for participation in a kid's soccer league. The plaque read, "World's biggest failure." For a second, I didn't react. I thought maybe it was a joke that would end with, "Just kidding." But when I looked up, everyone was watching me, waiting. My mother had that uneasy smile that meant she didn't want to intervene. My father just kept eating. And Evan? He was grinning from ear to ear. "Come on, laugh a little," Evan said, chuckling. "It's just a joke, man. Lighten up." Tyler giggled, clearly pleased with himself. "Dad said it's true, though," he blurted out. "He said you're just a failure who deserves nothing." The room went silent. My stomach dropped. For a moment, I just stared at the kid, then at Evan, whose grin faltered slightly. "Tyler," my mother said weakly, "that's not very nice." But before she could finish, Evan cut her off. "Relax, Mom. He's just repeating what adults say. Maybe if Corey didn't take everything so seriously, he'd." That's when Tyler picked up the trophy and, with a smug look, tossed it straight into the fireplace. The flames swallowed it instantly, plastic hissing and curling. I froze. Everyone just stared. Then Evan laughed, a loud, careless sound that filled the silence. My mother joined in, a nervous titter. Even my father smirked, shaking his head like it was some harmless prank. Something inside me went cold. I didn't say a word. I stood up, pushed my chair back, and walked out. No yelling, no dramatic exit, just quiet footsteps and the sound of the front door closing behind me. I drove home with that image burned into my mind, the trophy melting in the fire while my family laughed. The people who were supposed to have my back thought it was funny to humiliate me on my birthday. When I got home, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the dashboard, trying to figure out what hurt more, their laughter or the fact that I wasn't even surprised. Hours passed. I didn't answer my phone. I didn't check messages. I just sat there numb. Then, around midnight, my phone buzzed. A family group text lighting up the screen. It was from my mother. "Corey," she wrote, "your behavior tonight was uncalled for. Evan just wanted to make you laugh. Since you clearly don't want to be part of this family anymore, you're officially cut out of everything." I read it twice. Then a third time. The absurdity of it hit me like a slow wave. They humiliate me, laugh at me, and somehow I'm the problem. I took a deep breath, typed out one sentence, and hit send. Good. Check whose name owns the house you live in. Because they'd forgotten one crucial detail. When my father's business went bankrupt years ago, it was me who bought their house to keep the bank from taking it. They'd been renting it ever since, paying me a token amount that barely covered taxes. I didn't expect what happened next. 10 minutes later, my phone started vibrating nonstop. Calls, texts, notifications stacking on top of each other. Evan, Mom, even Dad. I didn't pick up a single one. By midnight, the missed call counter read 74. And that's where it began. The unraveling. The part of me that had always tried to keep peace finally cracked. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That night, sitting alone in my living room, I realized something. Sometimes, silence isn't weakness. It's the sound before the storm. And I had a storm coming for them. When I woke up the next morning, my phone was still lighting up like a Christmas tree. 74 missed calls had turned into 92. Text after text flooded the group chat, some pleading, some guilt-tripping, and others just plain angry. "Corey, you went too far. Son, this isn't funny. You scared your mother. You're being childish." And, of course, from Evan, "You're bluffing. You wouldn't dare kick your own parents out. Grow up, man." I stared at the screen, not replying to a single one. For years, I'd let things slide. Every jab, every joke. Every time I got sidelined so Evan could shine. But that text about being cut out of everything had crossed a line I didn't even know I had. It's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't lived it, but when you spend decades being the family punching bag, there's a moment where something inside you snaps, not with rage, but with clarity. That morning, clarity was all I had. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and pulled up the property records. There it was in black and white. My name, not theirs, on the deed. I'd taken ownership 6 years ago when Dad's construction business tanked, saving the house from foreclosure. They'd been living there under the illusion that it was still the family home. I never once reminded them because, back then, I thought doing good quietly meant something. I sat there, sipping my coffee, scrolling through their messages, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt calm, detached. By noon, I finally got a text from my mom that made me pause. "Come to the house tonight. We need to talk." No arguments. I almost ignored it, but something told me to go. Maybe I wanted to see just how far this would go. Maybe I wanted to hear them say it to my face, that I was no longer family. When I arrived, the atmosphere was thick enough to cut with a knife. My mother was sitting at the dining table, hands clasped like she was in a prayer meeting. Dad sat across from her, staring into space. Evan leaned back in his chair with that familiar smirk, the one that had haunted every family event since high school. "Corey," my mother began, her voice rehearsed and overly gentle. "We think you overreacted last night. Evan didn't mean to upset you. It was all in good fun. Good fun, I said slowly. You all laughed when your grandson threw my gift into the fire. Tyler's just a kid, Evan said, rolling his eyes. You're the adult. Maybe try acting like one. I turned to him. So it's fine for your kid to parrot insults about me because you feed them to him? That's parenting now. He leaned forward, smiling like he was about to win an argument on a talk show. Don't twist my words, little brother. I just tell him the truth. You're always playing victim. Maybe if you actually did something with your life, he'd look up to you. That last line landed like a knife. My father cleared his throat. That's enough, both of you. Corey, you need to understand, your brother's been through a lot. He's trying to get his business off the ground. We've all been trying to support him. Of course. Always the same story. Always Evan struggles, never mine. Support him how? I asked. By pretending his car flipping scheme is a business? By ignoring that he owes half this town money? Or by laughing at me every chance you get? My mother sighed heavily, her voice trembling with that fake disappointment she'd mastered over the years. Corey, we've tried so hard to include you. You're the one who keeps isolating yourself. You barely visit. You don't tell us what's going on in your life. We never know how you're doing. Because every time I do, I snapped. Evan finds a way to make it a competition. If I say work's going well, he says his is better. If I mention buying a new car, he mocks it. And you laugh. Every single time. Evan chuckled. You're so sensitive, man. No wonder you're single. That one hit a nerve. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. I looked at my parents, hoping, just hoping, one of them would say something. Defend me. Tell Evan to stop. But they just sat there, eyes downcast. That silence told me everything. I stood up slowly, chair scraping against the tile. You know what? You're right. I am done isolating myself from this. I gestured around the table. From pretending we're some kind of family. My mother stood quickly, her tone shifting from guilt to panic. Don't do this, Corey. This isn't what your father and I wanted. Then maybe you should have thought about that before laughing when your grandson called me a failure. Evan stood up too, towering over me. Oh, quit the drama. You're not going to kick them out. You don't have the guts. You're bluffing because you finally realized no one cares about your pity act. I stared at him for a long time, then smiled faintly. We'll see. I walked out again, the same way I had the night before. Calm. Controlled. But my hands were shaking by the time I got to my car. The next few days were quiet, eerily so. No calls, no texts. It was like they decided to freeze me out completely. I tried to focus on work, but every time I sat at my desk, my mind replayed the laughter, the fire, the sound of plastic melting. Then came the second hit. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. At first, I thought it was some boring tax notice, but when I opened it, my stomach turned. It was a request from my father, an official document, asking to transfer partial ownership of the house back to him for family stability. Evan's signature was on the bottom as a witness. I almost laughed. The audacity was surreal. They were actually trying to legally take back what they'd lost because of their own financial disasters. I didn't sign, of course. Instead, I took a photo of the document and sent it in the group chat with one message, bold move. Evan replied 5 minutes later, don't play games. Just sign it. You don't even live here. My mother added, we're just trying to make things simple, Corey. It's still the family home. I typed slowly, no, it's my home. Your tenants. That message didn't go over well. Within an hour, Evan was at my door. I didn't even know he remembered where I lived. He knocked so hard the picture frames rattled. When I opened it, he pushed past me like he owned the place. All right, enough of this power trip, he said, pacing the living room. You think holding the house over their heads makes you look strong? It makes you look pathetic. I think it makes me look like someone who's done being disrespected. He laughed, shaking his head. You really think Mom and Dad will ever forgive you for this? You're turning your back on them. They're our parents. Funny, I said quietly. Where was that loyalty when you were letting your kid insult me in front of them? He stopped pacing, eyes narrowing. That's not the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. You taught him it was okay to treat me like dirt, and they followed your lead. Now you're mad because I'm not bowing down anymore. He moved closer, lowering his voice. You're gonna regret this, Corey. You've always been jealous. That's what this is really about. I actually laughed. A dry, hollow sound. Jealous? Of what, Evan? Your debt? Your temper? Your kid learning to mock people instead of respect them? That one landed. His face flushed red, and for a second, I thought he might actually swing at me. But then he just scoffed, grabbed his jacket, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard it shook the hinges. After he left, I sat there in silence again. The same quiet that had filled my car that first night. Except this time, it wasn't numbness, it was resolve. The next day, my mother called, crying. She said I was tearing the family apart, that I was breaking her heart. She said, "Your brother's just under pressure. He didn't mean any harm." And for the first time in my life, I didn't cave. "Then maybe he should have thought of that before trying to steal my property," I said flatly. She sniffled. "You wouldn't really do anything drastic, would you?" I didn't answer. A few days later, things started getting weird. Someone left a voicemail pretending to be from the city's property office, saying there was a discrepancy with my ownership papers. It took me 2 minutes to verify the number was fake. Guess who it traced back to? Evan's so-called business partner. That's when I realized this wasn't just petty family drama anymore. This was a power play. I started keeping records, texts, voicemails, documents, everything. I wasn't about to be blindsided by their manipulation again. Still, I didn't respond. Silence was my weapon now. Every time they tried to provoke me, I ignored it. Every time they texted, "We just want to talk," I let it sit unread. Until one night, about 2 weeks later, I got a picture message from an unknown number. It was a photo of my parents' house, the one I owned, with the caption, "You wouldn't really throw your family out, would you?" And underneath, a second line, "Because we'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are." That was the moment it stopped being emotional and became strategic. Because if they wanted to play games, I could play better. It's strange how quickly a family can go from awkward silence to outright warfare. For a while, I thought the message with the photo of their house was the worst of it, a cheap scare tactic from Evan, meant to guilt trip me back into submission. But I underestimated how far he was willing to go once his pride was on the line. By the time 3 more weeks passed, I'd stopped hearing from my parents altogether. No calls, no texts. I figured they'd either given up or were too embarrassed to admit they'd lost. Part of me actually felt relieved. I went to work, hit the gym, cooked for myself, and for the first time in years, I slept without grinding my teeth. But peace never lasts long in a family like mine, not when manipulation is their favorite language. It started one Friday morning when I got a call from my bank. The woman on the line sounded professional, calm, but something in her tone told me this wasn't a routine call. "Mr. Turner," she said, "we're calling to verify that you recently attempted to take out a second mortgage on your property." I froze. "Excuse me." "Yes," she continued. "We received an online application this morning under your name. However, there are a few inconsistencies in the documentation that raised red flags." My heart started pounding. "What kind of inconsistencies?" "Well," she said carefully, "the employment information and signature don't match your records. We wanted to confirm before proceeding." It took me a second to find my voice. "That's not me. Someone's trying to use my name." She paused. "I see. We'll flag the attempt immediately and begin a fraud investigation. You'll receive the official report by mail, and we recommend contacting the police to file a statement as well." When I hung up, my hands were shaking. I didn't need to guess who was behind it. Evan might have been impulsive, but he wasn't stupid, and the timing was too perfect. After weeks of silence, suddenly someone tries to mess with the ownership of my house. It didn't take Sherlock Holmes to connect the dots. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, half rage, half disbelief. There's something uniquely painful about realizing your own brother would forge your name to try to steal what you worked for, not because he needed it, but because he couldn't stand you having control. By the evening, my phone lit up again, this time with a text from Mom. "Please come by tomorrow. There's been a misunderstanding." No apology. No explanation. Just that one cryptic message. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but curiosity, or maybe stupidity, won. So the next day, I drove to their house. My house. When I pulled up, there was a new car in the driveway, a shiny black SUV that screamed, "Evan finally conned someone again." The porch lights were on even though it was the middle of the day, and through the window, I could see movement. I took a deep breath and walked in without knocking. The first thing I saw was my mother sitting at the kitchen table, wringing her hands. My father was there too, looking uncomfortable. And, of course, Evan was leaning against the counter with that smug, self-satisfied look I'd come to despise. "Hey there, little brother," he said, as if we were catching up over coffee. "Glad you could make it." I didn't answer. What's going on? Mom jumped in quickly. Corey, please don't be angry. We just wanted to clear the air. Things have gotten out of hand. Out of hand, I said slowly. You mean the part where someone tried to forge my signature to take a mortgage out on this house? My father looked up sharply. What? What are you talking about? I turned my gaze to Evan. He didn't even flinch. Come on, he said, shrugging. You think you're the only one who can play hardball? You want to throw your family out? We'll find a way to fight back. You tried to commit fraud? I said, my voice rising for the first time. That's not fighting back. That's a felony. Stop exaggerating. Mom snapped, her tone suddenly sharp. We didn't do anything illegal. Evan was just trying to help. He said he could manage the mortgage better and… Mom, I cut her off. You knew? Her eyes darted away. Your father didn't want to worry you. Dad sighed, rubbing his temples. Corey, listen. Evan said he had a plan to refinance everything so we could all benefit. He said you were fine with it. I never said that. I shouted. You all signed my name without asking me. Evan laughed under his breath. You're so dramatic. It didn't even go through. Relax. There it was again, that dismissive tone, like my outrage was just a tantrum he could smirk his way through. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. I should call the police right now, I said quietly. Mom's expression twisted, somewhere between fear and anger. You'd really do that to your own family? I stared at her. You let your son steal from me. You tell me what I'm supposed to call that. She stood up, trembling with indignation. You've always been selfish, Corey. Always holding things over our heads. You never give. You just take and then act like a martyr when people need help. We were trying to fix this family, not break it. My jaw dropped. Fix it? By stealing from me? Evan stepped closer. It's not stealing if it's family property. You're just a caretaker, man. Everyone knows this house belongs to Mom and Dad. That was it. The moment something inside me cracked open. Not from anger, but from pure, exhausted disbelief. I looked around that kitchen, the faded wallpaper, the photos of birthdays and graduations on the walls, and realized I wasn't looking at my family anymore. I was looking at people who saw me as a wallet with a pulse. I want you all out, I said finally. Mom gasped. What? You heard me. I'm done. You have 30 days to vacate. You can't be serious, Dad said, standing up. This is our home. It was, I said, until you try to take it from me. Evan sneered. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said, turning toward the door. But at least I'll regret it from somewhere honest. I left before they could say another word. My hands were shaking as I got in the car, but I didn't cry. I didn't even scream. I just sat there staring at the house that had stopped feeling like home a long time ago. Later that night, I got another text, this time not from Mom or Evan, but from an unknown number again. It was a video. When I opened it, I froze. It was footage from a security camera, my security camera, showing Evan standing on my porch, looking into the lens, smiling. He held up a key and said, "Guess who still has access?" Then the video cut to black. My stomach dropped. I'd changed the locks months ago, but my parents still had an old spare key, which meant Evan had probably copied it. I checked my home security app. Sure enough, there had been a motion alert earlier that night while I was out grabbing dinner. Someone had entered my house. I called the police immediately, but when they arrived, there was no sign of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. Everything was perfectly in place, except for one thing. On my kitchen counter sat a small, cheap trophy, the same kind Tyler had thrown into the fire. Only this one wasn't melted. It was brand new, shiny, and engraved with the words, "You can't evict blood." I felt my throat close. It wasn't just mockery anymore. It was a warning. The officer suggested I change the locks again and file a restraining order if necessary. But what stuck with me wasn't the trophy itself. It was the knowledge that he'd been in my home. My supposed brother had broken into my space just to prove he could. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like someone standing in the corner. Around 3 a.m., I sat in the dark, scrolling through the photos on my phone, and landed on one from 5 years ago, a family barbecue. I was grilling, Evan was laughing with a beer in his hand, and Mom was smiling proudly. Back then, I'd thought maybe, just maybe, we'd finally grown past the favoritism. That maybe I'd earned my place. Looking at it now, it felt like a photo of strangers. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't warn Evan. I just quietly began the process of eviction. My lawyer told me it would take a few weeks, But once it was finalized, there'd be no going back. For the first time in years, I felt something close to control. But I should have known. People like Evan don't let go without a fight. A few days later, I came home from work to find an envelope taped to my door. Inside was a printed photo, one of me at my office building. It had clearly been taken that same day, from across the parking lot. Scrawled on the back, in thick black marker, were 4 words. "You're making a mistake." And that's when I realized, this wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was war. For the first time in my life, I was genuinely afraid of my own family. Not angry, afraid. That photo taped to my door was the moment the air shifted from tension to threat. I'd lived through years of snide remarks, guilt trips, and emotional manipulation, but being watched crossed a line I didn't even know they were capable of crossing. That night, I locked every door twice and dragged a chair in front of the main entrance. I didn't sleep. I just sat in the dark with my phone in my hand, waiting for another noise, another message, another sign that Evan was nearby. The silence was heavy, the kind that hums in your ears and makes every creak sound like footsteps. In the morning, I found muddy shoe prints on the side of my porch. They led from the driveway to my back window. My cameras had caught nothing. Evan must have figured out how to dodge their range. That realization made my stomach twist. He'd been watching long enough to learn the blind spots. I called the police again, but like last time, they couldn't do much. "You have no proof it was him," the officer said. "It could be anyone." Anyone. But I knew exactly who it was. I started carrying my phone everywhere, keeping every light on at night. I even parked a few blocks away from my house during the day, just to see if anyone was following me. Paranoia? Maybe. But paranoia starts to feel like common sense when your brother's idea of revenge includes stalking you. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, I got a call from my boss. "Corey, can you step into my office for a minute?" The tone was off. I knew immediately it wasn't about work performance. It was personal. When I walked in, she was sitting with a folder open, frowning at something on her desk. "We received an anonymous email this morning," she said carefully. "It contained some concerning information about you." My pulse quickened. "What kind of information?" She turned the folder toward me. Inside was a printed email, complete with screenshots of my social media, a few old forum posts from years ago, and a message claiming I'd been harassing my family and stealing their property. I felt my chest tighten. "This is a lie," I said quickly. "Someone's trying to smear me." "I figured as much," she said gently. "But HR still has to look into it. We'll need to put you on temporary leave while this is sorted out." The words hit harder than I expected. Temporary leave. No paycheck, no distraction from the chaos at home, just more time alone with my thoughts. When I got back to my car, I just sat there staring at the steering wheel. My vision blurred, and for a long moment, I couldn't even breathe properly. This was beyond revenge now. Evan wasn't just trying to humiliate me. He was trying to dismantle my life piece by piece. That afternoon, I drove aimlessly for hours. Through the city, down country roads, anywhere that didn't remind me of them. I ended up at a small lake outside town, parked under a tree, and just sat. The water was still, the sky gray. I remember thinking how quiet it was, how peaceful the world looked when you weren't being hunted by your own blood. I stayed there until the sun dipped below the horizon, watching as my phone buzzed endlessly in the cup holder. Calls, texts, voicemails. I didn't answer any of them. I didn't want to hear more apologies or fake concern. I didn't want to hear mom's voice cracking or dad's excuses. I didn't want to hear Evan's smug taunts pretending this was all some game. I wanted silence. When I finally drove home, I noticed my mailbox was slightly open. Inside, there was another envelope. No stamp, no sender. Just my name, scrawled in angry handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Stop trying to take what isn't yours. You're not one of us anymore." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. I knew that handwriting. Evan had been leaving me messages since we were kids, notes on my door, on my backpack, on my locker at school. Even his handwriting had that same arrogant tilt. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and started writing everything down. Every text, every call, every visit, every incident. Not for revenge, at least not yet, but because I realized I needed to protect myself. I needed a record. I started keeping a binder. Page after page, I printed out screenshots and reports, logging every contact with the police. It became my quiet ritual. When I couldn't sleep, I organized evidence. When I felt helpless, I wrote timelines. It sounds strange, but that binder gave me strength. It was the first time in months I felt like I was doing something, even if no one else knew about it. Meanwhile, things kept unraveling. My mother left a voicemail crying that I'd turned cold and that I was tearing the family apart. My father left another saying he didn't recognize me anymore. Not once did either of them mention Evan's behavior. It was like they'd all silently agreed that if they ignored his actions long enough, I'd give in and apologize. But I didn't. A week later, I got a letter from the city. Apparently, someone had filed a complaint claiming I was illegally renting out the property to an elderly couple without a permit. It was absurd, but it triggered an inspection notice. I could almost hear Evan's laughter when I read it. He was weaponizing bureaucracy now. So I did what I had to. I hired a lawyer full-time. Not the one who'd helped me start the eviction process. Someone new, sharper, colder. I told him everything. Every detail. He listened without interrupting, jotting notes the whole time. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "You're not paranoid. This is a coordinated attempt to discredit you and possibly pressure you into giving up the property. Don't talk to them directly. Don't respond to anything that's not through me." That was the first real comfort I'd felt in weeks. Still, the silence in my house grew heavier each night. I stopped inviting friends over. I started sleeping on the couch because the bedroom window faced the street, and I couldn't stand the thought of waking up to find someone standing there. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to a soft tapping sound, 3 slow taps against glass. My blood froze. It came from the window near the kitchen. I grabbed a flashlight and crept closer, heart hammering in my chest. When I shone the light, there was no one there. Just fog on the glass and 3 fingerprints smudged into the condensation. I called the police again, but by the time they arrived, the prints were gone. That was my breaking point. I started packing a bag the next morning, just the essentials. Laptop, documents, a few changes of clothes. I booked a long-term stay at a furnished apartment across town. I told no one, not even my coworkers. The next day, I left the house before sunrise. Driving away, I felt this strange mix of guilt and relief. Guilt because I was walking away from the place I'd worked so hard to protect. Relief because I was finally free from the constant fear of who might be outside my window. The apartment was small but quiet. No history, no ghosts, no photos of fake smiles on the wall. I could finally breathe again. For the first few days, I barely did anything. I slept. I cooked simple meals. I walked around the neighborhood, learning the streets. My lawyer handled everything else. Every so often, I'd get a new message from my family, each one more desperate than the last. "Please talk to us. We didn't mean it to go this far. Your mother's health is getting worse because of this." I didn't reply. I'd learned that in my family, guilt was currency, and I wasn't buying anymore. But there was one message that did make me stop and stare. It came from my father, and it wasn't angry or emotional. It was just 3 words. He sold it. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I read it again. He sold it. I opened my laptop and logged into the property records site. My stomach dropped when I saw the updated listing. The house, my house, was marked as pending sale. That couldn't be possible. The paperwork wasn't finalized yet. The eviction was still in process. I scrolled down and saw it, a forged signature again. My name. Evan had actually found a buyer. He'd managed to convince someone he had the authority to sell. I called my lawyer immediately, voice trembling as I explained what I was seeing. He went silent for a moment, then said, "All right, that's enough. We're escalating this. Now it's not just fraud, it's criminal." That night, sitting in my small apartment, I realized I'd officially lost everything that used to anchor me. My home, my job, my peace. My own blood had dragged me to rock bottom. But underneath the exhaustion and fear, something else started to stir. It wasn't anger anymore. It was precision. For the first time, I stopped reacting and started calculating. I knew Evan thought I was broken, that I'd just fade into the background while he claimed victory. But he'd made one mistake. He'd forgotten that I still had proof. Every message, every fake signature, every video, every footprint. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to forgive and forget. I was going to make sure he learned what it felt like to lose everything he thought he controlled. I never expected that hitting rock bottom would bring me a kind of peace I'd never had before. Maybe it's because when you lose everything, your home, your job, your sense of safety, you stop being afraid. There's nothing left they can take from you. And that makes you dangerous in a way they can't predict. The morning after I learned Evan had forged my signature again, I woke up before dawn and drove to my lawyer's office. I hadn't even slept. My mind was still running through every possible outcome: lawsuits, arrests, humiliation. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about how to protect them. I was thinking about how to protect myself. When I walked into the law firm, my lawyer, Mr. Haynes, was already there with 2 folders open. "I didn't wait for your call," he said. "I filed a fraud complaint first thing this morning. We're also filing a motion for an emergency injunction to freeze any sale or transfer of the property." He handed me one of the folders. Inside were neatly printed copies of every document I'd given him: the forgeries, the fake mortgage application, the harassment evidence. Seeing it all in one place was like looking at the autopsy of my family's love. "This," he said, tapping the folder, "is your shield and your sword. You've got enough here to not only stop them, but to make them face criminal charges. And I think it's time we make that very clear." For the first time in months, I smiled. Not the bitter, tired kind, but a genuine one. "Do it," I said. That day marked the beginning of the shift. The moment I stopped being their scapegoat and started becoming a problem they couldn't manipulate anymore. Over the next week, Haynes worked fast. He contacted the city's fraud division, the county clerk's office, and even the supposed buyer of the house. Turns out, the buyer was a private investor Evan had met through one of his shady car-flipping deals. The man had no idea the paperwork was fake. He thought Evan was acting on behalf of the family. When Haynes explained the situation, the buyer immediately backed off. In fact, he gave us an entire email chain of Evan promising a quick sale and bragging about how the paperwork's handled. That alone was enough to turn the investigation from civil to criminal. Then came the real twist. The buyer wanted to cooperate. He agreed to testify if needed, and even sent screenshots of Evan's messages. One of them said, "Don't worry, my brother's too much of a coward to do anything. I've got this handled." That line stuck with me for days. I think that was when I decided I wasn't going to settle quietly. I wanted Evan to see what it felt like to underestimate me. Haynes set up a meeting with the district attorney's office. We walked in with everything: the evidence, the timelines, the messages. The DA looked through it all carefully, then leaned back and said, "You're sitting on one of the cleanest fraud cases I've seen in a while. We'll pursue it." I didn't even realize I'd been holding my breath until I heard those words. After that meeting, everything started moving quickly. Investigators were assigned to gather statements. A subpoena was issued for the house's transaction history. Every fake document Evan had sent out would be traced. For the first time, they were the ones being cornered. And while that unfolded, something else changed in me. The anxiety that had followed me everywhere, the jumpy glances over my shoulder, the sleepless nights, the knots in my stomach, started to fade. I felt sharp again, focused. I spent my newfound free time rebuilding quietly. I got a part-time consulting gig through a friend, small projects at first, but steady work. It gave me enough breathing room to keep my bills paid without worrying about the lost job. The apartment started to feel like home. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom with creaky floors and a view of the parking lot, but it was mine, and no one could take it from me. I started running in the mornings, something I hadn't done since college. At first it was just to burn off the stress, but soon it became a ritual. I'd run as the sun rose, the streets empty and quiet, my breath syncing with the rhythm of my footsteps. For the first time in years, I felt control over my body and my mind. Every night, I checked in with Haynes. He kept me updated, sometimes with a hint of amusement. "Your brother's been dodging calls from investigators," he said one evening. He tried to claim the signature was a misunderstanding, but the handwriting analysis came back. "No doubt it's his." "And your parents? They're in deeper than they think." Apparently, Evan had convinced them to sign certain documents as co-owners of the property, claiming it was just for insurance purposes. They'd signed without reading, which tied them directly to his fraud. When I heard that, I didn't feel satisfaction, just sadness. They'd always been blind where Evan was concerned, and now it was catching up to them. Still, I didn't stop the process. I couldn't. Not anymore. Around that time, something unexpected happened. I got a call from an old college friend, Lila. We hadn't talked in years, but she'd heard about what happened through mutual friends. "I'm so sorry you're dealing with all that," she said. "If you ever want to get coffee, I'm around." Normally, I would have turned it down. But for once, I said yes. We met at a small cafe downtown. I told her the whole story, carefully, without too much bitterness, and she just listened. Really listened. No judgment, no fake sympathy, just quiet understanding. When I finished, she smiled softly and said, "You know, you're a lot stronger than you give yourself credit for." That line hit harder than I expected, because for years, my family had made me believe I was weak, too sensitive, too emotional, too soft. Hearing someone say the opposite felt like air after drowning. We started meeting regularly after that. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we just sat in silence, and somehow that silence didn't feel heavy like the one I'd known before. Meanwhile, the case built momentum. The DA's office had gathered enough evidence to formally press charges against Evan: fraud, forgery, and attempted theft of property. It wasn't just civil anymore. It was criminal. When I got the official notice in the mail, I remember staring at it for a long time. Not out of joy or vengeance, but disbelief. For years, I'd been their scapegoat. Now the law itself was standing between us. Haynes called that night. "Once the warrant's served, they'll probably panic," he said. "Don't respond to any calls. Let the system handle it." He was right. 2 days later, my phone lit up with a flood of messages. Mom, Dad, even Tyler, using Evan's phone. "Please, Corey, don't do this. You'll ruin his life. Corey, you're taking this too far. Be the bigger man." Every message was the same story they'd always told. That peace was more important than justice. That family was sacred even when it was toxic. But this time, I didn't feel guilty. Because peace without respect isn't peace, it's surrender. As the weeks went on, the power balance shifted entirely. My parents' house, the one Evan had tried to sell, was legally frozen. They couldn't touch it, couldn't refinance it, couldn't even use it as collateral. And since I was still the rightful owner, I had full authority to make decisions. Haynes called one afternoon, his tone casual, but with a hint of satisfaction. "We've received confirmation that the county has frozen all related assets. That includes your brother's accounts linked to the fraudulent documents." He's, let's say, not pleased. I laughed. For the first time in months, a real, unguarded laugh. A few days later, I got a notice that Evan's so-called car business had gone under. Apparently, his investors had pulled out after hearing about the criminal investigation. He'd gone from bragging about being untouchable to watching everything crumble. Meanwhile, my life kept quietly improving. My consulting work grew. Clients liked my organization and discipline. One of them offered me a full-time position with better pay than my old job. I accepted without hesitation. I moved into a better apartment, bought a used SUV, even started painting again, something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. For the first time in years, my reflection didn't look tired. It looked like someone who'd finally stopped apologizing for existing. Then, about 2 months after the charges were filed, I got an email from an unknown address. The subject line just said, "You won." It was from the same buyer Evan had tried to scam. The message was short. "Thought you'd want to know. Evan tried to reach out again, offering to settle privately." I told him no. Some people only learn the hard way. Glad you stood your ground. I sat back in my chair and read it twice, then closed my laptop. Outside my window, the city lights flickered softly. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel bitterness or rage, just quiet satisfaction. The kind that comes when the scales finally balance, even if only for a moment. I wasn't the quiet one anymore. I wasn't the family joke, the failure, or the overreacting brother. I was the one who survived their storm and learned how to build my own shelter. And though I didn't know it yet, the real reckoning hadn't even started. Because while I was rebuilding my life piece by piece, Evan was spiraling, and soon, the fallout would come crashing down on all of them. I kept the momentum, but I didn't let it turn into a spectacle. Revenge that's loud feels desperate. Revenge that's surgical is final. Over the next few weeks, I stitched together everything I'd gathered into a sequence that could not be ignored or swept under the same worn rug they'd always used to hide their mistakes. Haynes and the DA had already lined up the criminal case, enough for an indictment. But I realized that would take time and wouldn't necessarily fix the immediate damage or the humiliation. What I wanted was to take away the tools Evan used to brutalize everyone: his access, his money, his audience. I wanted him to lose the power he'd always used as a shield. I also wanted my parents to see, very clearly and without euphemism, what their choices had cost them. The setup was boring in all the right ways. I spent late nights drafting airtight civil claims, fraud, conversion, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Then we filed them. Haynes obtained emergency relief to freeze any assets connected to the fraudulent paperwork and to place a constructive trust on anything Evan had moved under that pretense. That didn't sound dramatic, but it did two crucial things. It prevented him from selling or hiding assets, and it gave the courts a legal pathway to recover what had been taken. While the prosecutors prepared the criminal file, Haynes served civil process on Evan's business entities, on his investor accounts, even on the garage where he stored cars. We linked each item to the forged documents and to messages where Evan bragged about having it all handled. At the same time, I fed the right, quiet pieces of the story to the right people. The buyer who'd backed out agreed to cooperate publicly. He gave statements to the DA and sat down with a local consumer reporter who had a nose for shady small-town scams. We didn't go for viral outrage or social media piling on. That would have felt like me begging for witnesses. Instead, we focused on tangible, irreversible consequences. Banks reversed the fraudulent mortgage application, repossession agents put holds on vehicles purchased with tainted funds, and vendors that relied on Evan's paperwork pulled their contracts. Investors who had been on the fence got the documentation they needed to sever ties. Within days, his cash flow that kept his wheels turning, the little loans, the dealer lines, the shaky credit that made him swagger, started to dry up. What I liked most was how calm I felt through it. There was no gloating, no dramatic confrontations. Everything moved like a well-ordered machine. I sat at my kitchen table one afternoon with two folders. One contained the civil orders, and the other emails and screenshots proving Evan's handiwork. I drove to the house, my house, because I wanted my parents to hear this from me, not from some neighbor or judge's letter. I wanted them to witness that the person they'd laughed at and dismissed had become the one who set the law in motion. I wanted them to stop pretending ignorance. When I walked in, the house smelled the same, dish soap and old coffee. And there was Evan in the living room, pacing like a caged animal, trying to look unconcerned. My mother was perched on the armchair, hands clasped so tight I could see the whiteness at her knuckles. Dad sat at the kitchen table, chin in hand, eyes hollow. I put the folders on the table and sat down like a guest at their breakfast. No theatrics, just me, my voice low and steady. I wasn't going to do this here, I said, and watched them flinch. But you all deserve to know how messy this gets when the people you protect make the rest of us collateral damage. I slid the first folder across to Dad. The court's temporary injunction, the freeze on the pending sale, the order to preserve all records. His fingers trembled as he opened it. He looked from the page to me and back again, like a man trying to reconcile two different life scripts written on the same day. He swallowed and said nothing. Evan scoffed, the old arrogance like a familiar rash. Is this some kind of joke? You going to lecture me about morals now? He'd always been theatrical. When cornered, he tried to perform bravado. I let him. I wanted him loud. The louder he got, the clearer his own words were when we'd already captured them in screenshots and witness statements. Listen to me, I said quietly, and for once he shut up. You forged my name. You tried to mortgage what belongs to me. You broke into my house and left a trophy that said you can't evict blood as a threat. That's not family protection. That's criminal conduct. I watched the color drain out of his face in stages. First the false flush, then the realization. The room had the vulnerable stillness of a jury waiting for the next exhibit. I didn't have to play the DA in person. Haynes had arranged for investigators to be in the area. They weren't expected at the house, but they were ready. What I did, instead, was pull out a small envelope and hand it to my mother. Inside were copies of messages she'd sent to Evan, instructions, coaxing him to do what's necessary to keep the home. It was careful, surgical evidence of her role in enabling him. She cried once, a tight, unexpected sound, and covered her face. Evan's phone buzzed then, frantic. He read a text, and his jaw dropped. No, 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 he stammered. They can't. He looked up at me, eyes wide and suddenly small. You set me up. There it was, the old projection. He tried to twist the story back onto me. I had the patience not to answer. There's a certain cruelty in silence when someone is trying to gaslight you. The silence becomes proof that you're not reacting because you don't have to. And then, Precisely when the house felt like it might split open under the weight of all the truths, there was a sound at the front door. Heavy, official footsteps. Two plainclothes officers walked in, handed Evan a copy of an arrest warrant and a packet with criminal charges, and asked him calmly to come with them for questioning. He looked as if someone had yanked the rug out from under him. Dad started to weep, loud and helpless, and Mom clutched the armrest so hard her knuckles went white. It was ugly and real and final sounding. I didn't cheer. I didn't dance. I simply sat there and watched Evan's bravado unravel into terrified explanations. He tried to bluff and bargain and blame, and the officers listened without flinching, then let him out in cuffs when he could not satisfy their questions about the forged documents, the copied keys, and the fraudulent mortgage applications. As the car doors closed and the engine started, the whole neighborhood seemed to exhale. I felt a hollow kind of victory in my chest. Vindicating, yes, but also a sorrow I hadn't expected. I had taken him down, and in doing so I'd exposed my parents' complicity and stripped away the last of the illusions that had kept our family together. The house was safe from being sold that week. The buyer had reaffirmed his cooperation, and banks had reversed tentative transfers. My legal counsel told me we had a strong path forward for recovering damages and protecting the property. I had leverage now, and leverage is power that can be wielded carefully. But right as I was filing the last of the documents with Haynes that night, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It wasn't a threat this time. It was a single line of text that made the floor tilt under me. You think that's the worst of it? The message was accompanied by a picture of a small, familiar cardboard box, one I recognized because I'd seen it before at the house, sitting in the middle of the driveway of a community center I used to volunteer at years ago, with no return address. I stared at the photo until my eyes watered. My stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with fear of physical harm and everything to do with understanding that this was far from over. I had won a legal battle and a public brace of justice, but there were other kinds of damage waiting, reputational blows, secrets, things Evan and whoever he trusted could still unleash. I closed my laptop, turned off the lamp, and for the first time since this started, felt that old, familiar adrenaline of a fight not yet finished. The officers had done their part tonight. The court had frozen their assets. Evan was behind bars for the night. But the text, the box picture, the tone, those told me that while I'd taken the first decisive cuts, there were deeper wounds waiting, and some of them would need a different kind of answer. I felt the shape of the next move assembling in my head, sharp and purposeful, and I knew I had to be even more surgical this time. The story was not over. When the police texted me a week later that Evan had agreed to a plea deal, I didn't feel the surge of triumph I expected, just the slow, quiet unclenching of a fist I didn't know I'd been making for months. The DA told me the charges were solid enough that Evan's lawyer had pushed him to take the deal. 5 years probation, full restitution, and forfeiture of his fraudulent assets. He'd also agreed to mandatory counseling for coercive familial behavior, a term that made me almost laugh. But the condition that mattered most was the restraining order. He couldn't contact me, visit me, or approach any property I owned. The law had finally drawn a border where I'd never been able to. Word spread fast. Small towns have long memories, and gossip travels quicker than wind. The same people who once admired Evan's charm started whispering about his fall. His investors pulled out completely. His so-called car business vanished overnight. The last time I saw him, at the courthouse, he looked like a man who'd aged 10 years in a month. His hair was grayer, his voice low, his bravado gone. He wouldn't meet my eyes. My parents didn't take it well. My mother sent one final message that said, "I hope you're happy now." I didn't reply. My father stayed silent. Eventually, I heard from a mutual friend that they'd sold off their possessions to pay the legal fines Evan's scheme had dumped on them. They moved into a small rental 2 towns over. The house, my house, was restored fully to my name and cleared of every fraudulent mark. But I didn't move back in. I couldn't. Too many ghosts lived in the walls, too many echoes of laughter that had turned into mockery. I decided to sell it myself, legally this time, and donated part of the proceeds to a local shelter that helped people escape toxic families and rebuild from nothing. Watching the sale close felt like shedding a skin I'd been trapped in for years. Meanwhile, my own life had become startlingly simple. I'd kept my new job, earned respect for my discipline, and even started mentoring younger colleagues who reminded me of who I'd been before all of this. Quiet, underestimated, afraid to speak up. Lila and I grew close, though not in a storybook way. She was just steady, someone who didn't need fixing, didn't demand apologies for scars she hadn't caused. We'd sit in the park on weekends, and she'd tease me for checking my phone too often. "They don't own your silence anymore," she'd remind me. She was right. The final piece came when the court mailed me the restitution check. It wasn't the money that mattered. It was the signature at the bottom. Evans, scribbled shakily beneath a stamped note that read "paid in full." It was poetic, really. The same hand that had once forged my name was now forced to sign his own surrender. I didn't cash it immediately. For a while, I just left it pinned to my fridge as a reminder. Not of revenge, but of closure. Because revenge is noisy, but closure is quiet. Revenge feeds on anger. Closure ends its hunger. Months passed. One night, I went for a drive past the old neighborhood. The lights were dimmer than I remembered. The house looked smaller, lonelier. There was a "for rent" sign on the lawn and no laughter inside. For a moment, I thought about stopping, but then I realized there was nothing left to say. The version of me who would have still sought their approval didn't live there anymore. I rolled down the window, breathed in the cool air, and smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped playing. Before I turned the corner, I whispered something I'd wanted to say for years, something no one else would ever hear. "You called me a failure. But the truth is, I just stopped failing to love people who never earned it." And with that, I drove away for good.